The explorator fleets of the Adeptus Mechanicus represent one of the most ambitious and far-reaching endeavors undertaken by the priesthood of Mars. These expeditionary forces venture beyond the boundaries of known space, driven by an insatiable hunger for lost technology and forbidden knowledge. To understand the explorators, one must first examine the circumstances that brought them into existence and the theological framework that compels them to risk everything in their pursuit of ancient secrets. The origins of the explorator fleets trace back to the turbulent period following the Age of Strife, when humanity emerged from millennia of isolation and catastrophe. During this dark age, human civilization had collapsed into fragmented pockets of survivors, cut off from one another by warp storms that made interstellar travel impossible. Mars itself had weathered this storm, though not without cost. The tech priests of the Red Planet had preserved much of their technological knowledge, maintaining their forge complexes and manufacturing capabilities even as they lost contact with the rest of humanity. When the warp storms finally subsided, and the Emperor of Mankind began his great crusade to reunify the scattered remnants of human civilization, Mars became a critical strategic objective. The Treaty of Mars, also called the Treaty of Olympus Mons after the location where it was signed, established the formal relationship between the nascent Imperium and the Mechanicum of Mars. This agreement recognized the tech priests' sovereignty over their own domain while binding them to the imperial cause. The Mechanicum would provide the technological expertise and manufacturing capacity necessary for the Great Crusade, supplying weapons, armor, vehicles, and starships to the Emperor's expanding armies. In return, the Mechanicum gained the right to pursue their own agenda alongside the imperial expansion, seeking out lost technology and establishing forge worlds throughout the galaxy. This provision within the treaty laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the explorator fleets. The theological foundation for these expeditions rests upon the central doctrine of the cult Mechanicus, the quest for knowledge. According to Mechanicus belief, the machine god created all technology during a mythical golden age, and this knowledge was subsequently lost during humanity's fall. Every piece of technology, every fragment of ancient data, represents a holy relic containing a portion of the machine god's divine wisdom. The tech priests view themselves not as inventors or creators, but as archaeologists and custodians, seeking to recover and preserve what was made long ago. This theological framework transforms what might otherwise be simple resource gathering into a sacred mission, elevating the explorators to the status of pilgrims on a holy quest. The ultimate prize in this quest remains the standard template construct systems, legendary repositories of technological knowledge from the dark age of technology. These SDC systems contained complete manufacturing templates and instructions for creating everything from basic tools to advanced weapons and vehicles. During humanity's expansion across the stars before the Age of Strife, SDC systems allowed colonists to rebuild civilization on distant worlds, providing them with all the knowledge necessary to construct whatever they needed from local materials. The vast majority of these systems were destroyed or lost during the subsequent collapse, making intact SDCs or even partial fragments objects of immense value. A single complete SDC template could revolutionize an entire forge world's manufacturing capabilities, while a fully functional SDC system would represent the greatest technological discovery in 10,000 years. Beyond SDC systems, explorators hunt for archaeotech, the physical remnants and artifacts from the dark age of technology. These items demonstrate capabilities that current imperial technology cannot replicate, from weapons that manipulate fundamental forces to devices whose very function remains mysterious to modern tech priests. Each piece of archaeotech offers potential insights into lost manufacturing techniques or forgotten scientific principles. The recovery of such artifacts justifies enormous expenditures of resources and the loss of countless lives, as the Mechanicus believes that understanding these relics brings them closer to the machine god's ultimate truth. The organizational structure of the explorator fleets distinguishes them from other military assets controlled by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Standard Forge worlds maintain defensive forces consisting of Skitarii legions, Titan legions, and various other military assets designed to protect their facilities and wage war when required. These forces answer to the Forge world's ruling fabricator and serve primarily defensive or tactical purposes within the broader Imperial military structure. Explorator fleets, by contrast, operate with significantly more autonomy and follow a different command hierarchy optimized for long-range exploration rather than territorial defense. An Explorator fleet typically centers around a Magos Explorator, a high-ranking tech priest who has demonstrated both technical expertise and the leadership qualities necessary to command extended expeditions into unknown space. This Magos holds absolute authority over the fleet's operations, making decisions about which systems to investigate, how to approach potentially hostile situations, and when to retreat or press forward. Below the Magos Explorator, the fleet's command structure includes specialized tech priests responsible for various aspects of the expedition, janitors who study biological specimens, logis who analyze data and calculate probabilities, artisans who maintain and repair the fleet's equipment, and magi who oversee specific research priorities. The military component of an Explorator fleet falls under separate command, typically led by a high-ranking Skitarii marshal, or in larger expeditions, a princeps commanding attached Titan maniples. This division between scientific and military leadership creates a dual command structure where the Magos Explorator sets strategic objectives while military commanders handle tactical execution. This arrangement sometimes generates friction, particularly when the Magos' desire to investigate a promising site conflicts with military assessments of acceptable risk. The relationship between Explorator fleets and the Fabricator General of Mars reflects the complex political dynamics within the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Fabricator General, as the supreme leader of the Mechanicus and a High Lord of Terra, theoretically commands ultimate authority over all Explorator operations. In practice, the vast distances involved and the independence granted to individual Forge worlds means that most Explorator fleets maintain only nominal ties to Mars itself. The Fabricator General issues broad directives and establishes general priorities for exploration efforts, but individual Forge worlds sponsor and outfit their own expeditions according to their specific needs and interests. Forge worlds invest enormous resources in outfitting Explorator fleets, viewing them as long-term investments that may take decades or even centuries to yield returns. A typical fleet requires multiple starships, including armed escorts to deal with hostile forces, transport vessels to carry equipment and personnel, and specialized survey ships equipped with advanced scanning arrays. The Forge world must also supply the fleet with everything needed for extended independent operations: repair facilities, manufacturing equipment to produce spare parts, massive data storage systems, and sufficient supplies to sustain the expedition for years without resupply. The initial outlay for a major Explorator expedition can strain even a wealthy Forge world's resources. The potential rewards justify these investments. A successful Explorator fleet might claim entire systems rich in rare minerals, or discover forge complexes abandoned since the Age of Strife, complete with functioning manufacturing equipment. More importantly, the recovery of significant archaeotech or STC fragments can elevate a Forge world status within the Mechanicus hierarchy, granting it access to knowledge and capabilities its rivals lack. Forge worlds compete intensely for the prestige associated with major discoveries, sometimes dispatching multiple competing Explorator fleets to investigate the same rumors of lost technology. This competitive dynamic extends beyond individual Forge worlds to encompass the various factions within the Mechanicus itself. Different philosophical schools and theological interpretations divide the tech priests, and these divisions influence how Explorator fleets conduct their missions. Some magi pursue a conservative approach, seeking only to recover and preserve ancient technology without attempting to understand or modify it. Others advocate for more aggressive research, arguing that the machine god expects his servants to build upon recovered knowledge rather than simply cataloging it. These philosophical differences can determine whether a fleet focuses on systematic surveys of multiple systems or concentrates its efforts on thoroughly investigating a single promising location. The autonomy granted to explorator fleets creates opportunities for individual magi to pursue personal obsessions or follow leads that more conservative Forge World authorities might reject. A Magos explorator commanding a fleet light years from the nearest Imperial outpost can make decisions that would never receive approval from their superiors, whether investigating Xeno's technology despite prohibitions against such research or venturing into regions of space marked as forbidden by ancient imperial edicts. This freedom attracts ambitious and unorthodox tech priests who chafe under the rigid hierarchies of their home Forge worlds, seeing explorator service as an opportunity to pursue the quest for knowledge without interference from hidebound superiors. The vessels that comprise an explorator fleet represent some of the most technologically sophisticated and ancient spacecraft still operating within the Imperium. Unlike the standardized warships produced by Imperial Navy dockyards, Mechanicus vessels incorporate technologies that date back millennia, with some components predating even the Imperium itself. The construction and maintenance of these ships demands expertise found only within the Forge worlds, and many incorporate irreplaceable systems whose function modern tech priests can maintain but no longer fully comprehend. At the heart of every major explorator fleet lies an Arch Mechanicus, a vessel classification that transcends simple military designations. These immense spacecraft function as mobile Forge worlds, self-contained manufacturing, and research complexes capable of operating independently for decades without requiring external support. The largest Arch Mechanicus vessels stretch dozens of kilometers from prow to stern, their hulls bristling with sensor arrays, weapons batteries, and the distinctive architecture of Mechanicus construction. Unlike the Gothic styling favored by Imperial Navy vessels, Arch Mechanicus ships display the functional aesthetics of the Mechanicus, with exposed structural elements, massive heat sinks, and modular components that can be reconfigured as mission requirements change. The interior spaces of an Arch Mechanicus reflect its dual nature as both warship and research facility. Vast manufactorums occupy entire decks, housing assembly lines capable of producing everything from basic tools to sophisticated weapon systems. These facilities allow the fleet to manufacture replacement parts for damaged vessels, construct specialized equipment for planetary surveys, and even build entirely new spacecraft given sufficient time and raw materials. Adjacent to the manufactorums, extensive laboratorium complexes provide tech priests with the facilities necessary to analyze recovered artifacts, conduct experiments, and process the enormous quantities of data gathered during exploration operations. The command systems aboard an Arch Mechanicus integrate seamlessly with the Magos explorator who leads the fleet. Senior tech priests undergo extensive augmentation, replacing biological systems with mechanical components that allow direct neural interface with the ship's machine spirits. This integration transforms the Magos into something more than a ship's captain, creating a symbiotic relationship where the boundary between commander and vessel becomes increasingly indistinct. The Magos experiences the ship's sensor feeds as extensions of their own perception, processes targeting data through dedicated cognitive implants, and issues commands through direct thought impulse rather than verbal orders. The weapons systems mounted on Arch Mechanicus vessels reflect the Mechanicus's access to technologies unavailable to the Imperial Navy. Many carry Nova cannons capable of unleashing devastating long-range bombardments, while others mount exotic weapons whose principles of operation remain mysterious even to their operators. Some Arch Mechanicus ships carry graviton weapons that manipulate localized gravity fields to crush enemy vessels, while others employ conversion beamers that transform matter directly into energy. The most ancient vessels sometimes mount Dark Age weaponry whose destructive potential exceeds anything in the current Imperial arsenal, though activating these systems carries significant risk as their machine spirits grow increasingly unstable after millennia of operation. Defense systems on these flagship vessels incorporate multiple redundant void shield generators, adamantium armor plating meters thick, and sophisticated point defense arrays designed to intercept incoming ordnance. The ships also carry extensive repair facilities staffed by teams of engineers and servitors who can conduct emergency repairs even during combat operations. This combination of offensive capability and defensive resilience makes Mechanicus vessels formidable opponents in void combat, though their true value lies in their research and manufacturing capabilities rather than pure military power. Supporting the Mechanicus, Explorator fleets deploy various cruiser and light cruiser classes modified specifically for long-range exploration duties. The Defiant-class light cruiser serves as a common choice for these operations, valued for its balance of speed, firepower, and sensor capability. Standard Imperial Navy Defiant-class vessels mount weapon batteries and lance turrets optimized for fleet engagements, but Mechanicus modifications replace some weapon systems with enhanced auger arrays capable of detecting anomalies across vast distances. These augmented sensor suites can identify energy signatures consistent with active technology, detect mineral deposits beneath planetary surfaces, and analyze stellar phenomena that might indicate the presence of ancient installations. The Endeavour-class light cruiser represents another frequent addition to Explorator fleets, particularly valued for its relatively efficient plasma drives and extended operational range. Mechanicus shipwrights further modify these vessels by installing additional fuel storage, reinforced cargo holds for recovered artifacts, and specialized landing bays that can accommodate the survey craft and dropships necessary for planetary operations. The Endeavour's lance armaments provide effective long-range firepower against potential threats, while its lighter displacement compared to full cruisers allows for greater maneuverability when navigating through asteroid fields or approaching derelict space stations. Mechanicus cruiser classes bring heavier firepower and greater cargo capacity to Explorator operations. The Lunar-class cruiser, when outfitted by Mechanicus shipyards, receives substantial modifications that distinguish it from Imperial Navy variants. Tech priests install additional power generation systems to support energy-intensive survey equipment, expand the ship's data processing centers to handle the massive information flows generated during exploration, and reinforce structural elements to accommodate the installation of specialized equipment. These cruisers often serve as secondary command vessels, allowing the fleet to divide into multiple task forces when investigating several sites within a single system. Escort vessels form the defensive screen that protects the more valuable research and command ships from hostile forces. Mechanicus escort squadrons typically include Sword-class frigates and Firestorm-class frigates, both mounting weapons configurations suitable for engaging raiders, pirates, and Xenos craft. The escorts operate in coordinated groups, their relatively small size and high speed allowing them to respond quickly to threats and intercept hostile vessels before they can close with the fleet's capital ships. Unlike Imperial Navy escorts that focus purely on combat capability, Mechanicus variants often sacrifice some weapons capacity to install additional sensor equipment, transforming them into mobile observation posts that extend the fleet's detection range. Specialized survey vessels accompany every Explorator fleet purpose-built craft that sacrifice combat capability entirely in favor of sophisticated analysis equipment. These vessels mount sensor arrays of staggering sensitivity, capable of detecting trace energy emissions from deactivated technology buried beneath kilometers of rock or identifying chemical signatures consistent with ancient human habitation. Survey vessels operate under heavy escort protection, as their minimal armament leaves them vulnerable to even light enemy forces. The crews of these ships consist almost entirely of tech priests and servitors dedicated to operating and maintaining the delicate sensor equipment, with minimal provisions for crew comfort or amenities beyond what strict functionality requires. Mining barges represent the industrial backbone of extended Explorator operations, massive cargo vessels equipped with excavation equipment and ore processing facilities. These ungainly craft descend to resource-rich worlds and asteroids, deploying armies of servitors and automated mining equipment to extract valuable minerals. The processed ore feeds directly into the fleet's manufactorums, providing raw materials for repairs and construction. Mining barges mount only token defensive armament, relying entirely on escort vessels for protection against hostile forces. Their cavernous holds can accommodate millions of tons of processed ore, and some of the largest mining barges rival cruisers in overall displacement despite their non-combat role. The integration of ground forces and their transport craft adds another layer of complexity to fleet composition. Explorator fleets maintain substantial Skitarii contingents for planetary operations, requiring dedicated transport vessels and dropships. The Mechanicus favors heavily armored dropships capable of delivering troops directly into hostile environments, prioritizing survivability over speed or elegance. These craft mount reinforced hulls designed to withstand anti-aircraft fire and feature redundant systems that allow them to complete landing operations even after sustaining significant damage. Scorpius transports serve as the primary ground vehicles for Skitarii forces during planetary expeditions, combining troop-carrying capacity with sophisticated sensor equipment and respectable firepower. These anti-grav vehicles can traverse difficult terrain that would stall wheeled or tracked vehicles, making them ideal for exploring worlds where ancient installations might be located in remote or inaccessible regions. The Scorpius Junirider variant focuses on troop transport, while the Disintegrator pattern mounts heavier weapons for fire support. Explorator fleets typically carry dozens of these vehicles aboard their transport ships, along with the fuel, ammunition, and spare parts necessary to maintain them during extended surface operations. Archaeopter aircraft provide aerial reconnaissance and fire support for ground operations, filling a crucial capability gap in the Mechanicus military arsenal. These distinctive aircraft combine elements of fixed-wing and rotary designs, using multiple rotor assemblies to achieve vertical takeoff while maintaining reasonable forward speed. The Archaeopter Fusilier variant serves as a strike craft, mounting twin Cogni's heavy stubbers and a twin heavy phosphor blaster for ground attack missions. The Stratoraptor pattern functions as an interceptor, engaging enemy aircraft and providing air superiority over landing zones. The Transvector variant operates as a transport, carrying small teams of tech priests and Skitarii to remote locations that ground vehicles cannot easily reach. The logistical requirements for maintaining this diverse array of vessels and vehicles demand careful planning and enormous resource expenditure. Each ship requires regular maintenance, with engine seers conducting constant inspections and repairs to keep ancient systems functioning. Fuel consumption alone represents a major concern, as plasma drives and other propulsion systems consume enormous quantities of refined promethium and other exotic fuels. Explorator fleets must either carry sufficient fuel reserves for their entire expedition or locate sources of raw materials that can be refined into usable fuel, adding another objective to their exploration activities. Ammunition stocks present similar challenges, particularly for fleets expecting to encounter significant hostile resistance. Macro cannon shells, lance capacitors, missile warheads, and the countless other munitions required by fleet weapon systems occupy vast storage magazines. Ground forces require their own ammunition supplies, from the galvanic rounds fired by Skitarii weapons to the more exotic ammunition used by specialized equipment. Conservative magi carefully calculate ammunition expenditure rates and establish strict protocols for weapons usage, while more aggressive commanders accept the risk of running low on munitions in exchange for more thorough exploration of promising sites. The human element, such as it exists within Mechanicus vessels, requires its own support infrastructure. Even heavily augmented tech priests need some biological sustenance, while the Skitarii forces and less augmented crew members require regular food supplies, water, and breathable atmosphere. Life support systems aboard Mechanicus vessels function with characteristic efficiency, recycling waste products and maintaining minimal but adequate environmental conditions. The Mechanicus views excessive crew comfort as wasteful inefficiency, resulting in Spartan conditions that would seem harsh by Imperial Navy standards, but which the tech priests consider perfectly adequate for their purposes. The command hierarchy of an explorator fleet represents one of the most complex organizational structures within the Adeptus Mechanicus, balancing individual expertise with collective decision-making processes that prioritize logic and calculated probability over intuition or emotion. At the apex of this structure stands the Magos Explorator, a position that demands not only centuries of technical mastery, but also the political acumen necessary to navigate the fractious internal politics of the Mechanicus, while maintaining absolute authority over fleet operations spanning decades or longer. A tech priest does not simply receive appointment to the rank of Magos Explorator through seniority or political favor alone. The position requires demonstrated excellence across multiple technological disciplines, as the challenges of long-range exploration demand expertise that transcends narrow specialization. A typical Magos Explorator has spent centuries mastering the principles of stellar navigation, xenobiological analysis, materials science, and weapons technology, accumulating knowledge through direct experience rather than mere data absorption. Many have served aboard previous Explorator expeditions in subordinate roles, learning the practical realities of exploration operations before assuming command themselves. Others earned their positions through groundbreaking research that attracted the attention of Forge World ruling councils, who recognized that such innovative thinking might yield exceptional results when applied to the quest for knowledge. The augmentations undergone by a Magos Explorator far exceed those of standard tech priests, transforming them into beings that exist at the intersection of flesh and machine. Neural implants connect directly to the Arc Mechanicus's command systems, allowing the Magos to process sensor data from across the fleet simultaneously. Cognitive enhancement engines accelerate their thought processes, enabling rapid analysis of tactical situations and research data that would overwhelm unaugmented minds. Mechadendrites equipped with specialized tools extend from their bodies, capable of performing delicate repairs or manipulating equipment without requiring the Magos to divert their attention from command responsibilities. Some Magi replace their biological eyes entirely with advanced optical sensors that perceive electromagnetic spectra invisible to baseline human vision, while others install additional memory storage systems that supplement their biological neural tissue with crystalline data matrices. The authority wielded by a Magos Explorator aboard their fleet approaches absolute, constrained only by the 16 universal laws that govern all Mechanicus operations and the specific mission parameters established by their sponsoring Forge World. They determine which systems warrant investigation, how long the fleet remains at each location, and when potential discoveries justify the expenditure of resources or the risk of casualties. This concentration of power stems from practical necessity rather than mere tradition. The vast distances separating Explorator fleets from their home Forge worlds make real-time communication impossible, as astropathic messages can take months or years to traverse the galaxy. The Magos must make critical decisions without the ability to consult with superiors or request guidance, relying instead on their own judgment and the counsel of their senior staff. The Council of Senior Magi serves as both advisory body and specialized department heads, each bringing expertise in specific domains essential to exploration operations. The Magos Biologists occupies a particularly crucial position within this council, responsible for analyzing all biological specimens encountered during the expedition. Their duties extend beyond simple cataloging to encompass threat assessment of xenobiological organisms, evaluation of potential resources on surveyed worlds, and the study of how life adapts to different environmental conditions. A skilled Magos biologist can determine whether a planet's ecosystem poses dangers to landing parties, identify valuable biological compounds that might have industrial applications, or recognize signs of genetic manipulation that indicate previous human habitation. They maintain extensive laboratorium facilities aboard the fleet's vessels, equipped with gene sequencers, molecular analysis equipment, and containment systems for potentially hazardous specimens. The work of the Magos biologists frequently brings them into contact with organisms that challenge Mechanicus' understanding of life itself. Worlds isolated for millennia develop unique evolutionary pathways, producing creatures that bear little resemblance to familiar Terran biology. Some specimens display characteristics that suggest artificial engineering, remnants of Dark Age biological experiments, or the products of Xeno's genetic manipulation. The Magos biologists must determine which discoveries warrant preservation for further study and which represent threats that require immediate sterilization. This responsibility carries significant weight, as the introduction of invasive organisms to the fleet's vessels could compromise entire expeditions, while the destruction of potentially valuable specimens wastes opportunities for advancing Mechanicus knowledge. The Magos Metallurgicus focuses their expertise on mineral surveying and materials analysis, identifying worlds and asteroids rich in resources valuable to the Mechanicus. Their sensor arrays scan planetary crusts for concentrations of rare elements, detect the electromagnetic signatures of metal deposits, and analyze the composition of asteroid fields. Beyond simple resource location, the Magos Metallurgicus evaluates the quality and accessibility of discovered materials, calculating whether extraction operations would prove economically viable given the fleet's available equipment and time constraints. They maintain detailed geological databases compiled from thousands of surveyed worlds, using this information to predict where valuable deposits might exist based on planetary formation patterns and stellar composition. The discovery of unusual materials or alloys unknown to current Mechanicus databases falls under the Magos Metallurgicus's purview. Dark Age manufacturing processes produced materials with properties that modern forge worlds cannot replicate, from armor plating that repairs itself at the molecular level to superconducting alloys that operate at room temperature. When survey teams recover artifacts constructed from such materials, the Magos Metallurgicus conducts exhaustive analysis attempting to reverse engineer their composition and manufacturing techniques. Even partial success in understanding these materials can provide valuable insights, though complete replication often remains beyond current Mechanicus capabilities. The Magos Xenologus occupies perhaps the most controversial position within the Command Council, as their duties require direct study of Xeno's technology, despite the general Imperial prohibition against such research. The Mechanicus maintains a pragmatic approach to this restriction, arguing that understanding alien technology serves the Emperor's interests by revealing enemy capabilities and potential weaknesses. A Magos Xenologus must walk a careful line between legitimate research and tech heresy, studying Xeno's devices without allowing alien principles to corrupt proper Mechanicus doctrine. They analyze recovered Xeno's weapons to determine their function and operating principles, examine alien spacecraft to understand their propulsion and life support systems, and investigate Xeno's installations to assess their technological sophistication. The challenges facing a Magos Xenologus extend beyond mere technical analysis. Xeno's technology frequently operates on principles that contradict Mechanicus' understanding of physics and engineering. Ildari devices incorporate psychically reactive materials that respond to thoughts rather than mechanical input, while Orc technology functions through collective psychic belief rather than sound engineering principles. Necron artifacts demonstrate capabilities that suggest mastery of fundamental forces, far exceeding anything in the Imperial arsenal. The Magos Xenologus must develop frameworks for understanding these alien approaches to technology without abandoning the core principles of Mechanicus belief. Some find this balance impossible to maintain, gradually becoming corrupted by exposure to Xeno's thinking, until they can no longer distinguish between holy Mechanicus doctrine and alien heresy. Supporting these senior magi, numerous subordinate tech priests handle specialized functions essential to fleet operations. Electro-priests serve as living conduits for electrical power, their bodies modified to channel and manipulate raw energy. These zealots maintain the fleet's power generation systems, conducting rituals that appease the machine spirits of plasma reactors and ensure steady energy flow throughout the vessels. During combat operations, electro-priests sometimes deploy as shock troops, channeling devastating electrical discharges through their hands to disable enemy equipment or electrocute hostile personnel. Their presence aboard explorator vessels serves both practical and spiritual purposes, as their constant communion with electrical systems helps identify potential malfunctions before they escalate into critical failures. Lex Mechanics function as the fleet's information processors and archivists, managing the vast quantities of data generated during exploration operations. Every sensor sweep, every analyzed specimen, every surveyed world produces terabytes of information that must be cataloged, cross-referenced, and stored for future analysis. The Lex Mechanics maintain the fleet's data repositories, employing sophisticated sorting algorithms and mnemonic enhancement to organize this information in ways that allow rapid retrieval when needed. They also serve as the primary interface between the fleet's various departments, ensuring that discoveries made by the Magos Biologes reach the attention of the Magos Metallurgicus if they indicate valuable mineral deposits, or that tactical intelligence gathered by military forces informs the Magos Explorators' strategic decisions. The cognitive load required for these duties pushes Lex Mechanics to undergo extensive neural augmentation, installing additional memory storage and processing capability directly into their brains. Some replace large portions of their biological neural tissue with cogitator systems, accepting the loss of emotional capacity and creative thinking in exchange for perfect recall and rapid data analysis. The most heavily modified Lex Mechanics become barely recognizable as human, their skulls enlarged to accommodate banks of memory crystals, and their bodies reduced to minimal biological support systems for their augmented minds. Datasmiths occupy a unique position within the fleet hierarchy, serving as intermediaries between the Mechanicus personnel and the machine spirits that inhabit the fleet's equipment. These specialists possess an intuitive understanding of machine psychology, if such a term can apply to the semi-sentient artificial intelligences that control everything from weapon systems to life support. A skilled datasmith can coax optimal performance from reluctant machine spirits, calm agitated systems that threaten to malfunction, and establish rapport with newly recovered artifacts whose machine spirits remain dormant after millennia of inactivity. They move throughout the fleet conducting constant maintenance rituals, applying sacred unguents, burning incense, and chanting binary prayers that soothe the machine spirits and maintain their cooperation. The relationship between datasmiths and machine spirits transcends simple mechanical maintenance. Machine spirits, particularly those inhabiting ancient equipment, develop distinct personalities over centuries of operation. Some become temperamental, requiring elaborate rituals before they consent to activate. Others grow possessive of their datasmith handlers, refusing to function properly when operated by unfamiliar personnel. The most ancient machine spirits sometimes display behaviors that suggest genuine consciousness, making decisions that seem to demonstrate independent thought rather than mere programmed responses. Datasmiths learn to recognize these quirks and adapt their approach accordingly, treating each machine's spirit as an individual requiring personalized attention. The decision-making processes employed by explorator command structures reflect the Mechanicus's fundamental belief in logic and calculation over emotion or intuition. When faced with significant choices, the Magos Explorator convenes their council of senior magi to present their analysis and recommendations. Each Magos provides data supporting their position, including probability calculations generated by logic engines that evaluate potential outcomes. The Magos Biologes might present risk assessments for landing operations on a world with hostile fauna, while the Magos Metallurgicus offers resource estimates and extraction timelines. The Magos Xenologes contributes intelligence regarding potential Xenos presence and the technological sophistication of any alien installations detected by survey scans. The logic engines employed in these deliberations represent sophisticated analytical tools that process vast quantities of data to generate probability matrices. These devices, somewhere between cogitators and true artificial intelligences, evaluate countless variables simultaneously. They calculate fuel consumption rates, ammunition expenditure, potential casualties, resource yields, and strategic value, combining these factors into comprehensive assessments. The output takes the form of numerical probability ratings that indicate the likelihood of success for various courses of action. A proposed planetary landing might receive a 73% probability of successful completion with acceptable casualties, while an alternative approach generates an 81% success rating, but requires twice the time commitment. The Magos Explorator weighs these probability assessments against the mission's broader objectives and the fleet's current status. Pure mathematical optimization sometimes conflicts with strategic considerations that the logic engines cannot fully quantify. A site showing low probability of containing valuable discoveries might still warrant investigation if it offers the only opportunity to resupply critical resources. Conversely, a location with high potential value might be abandoned if pursuing it would exhaust the fleet's fuel reserves and prevent return to Imperial space. The Magos must balance the quest for knowledge against practical survival concerns, recognizing that a fleet destroyed in pursuit of discoveries serves the machine god poorly. The 16 universal laws provide the fundamental framework within which all Mechanicus decision-making occurs. These ancient principles, established during the founding of the cult Mechanicus, define acceptable behavior and establish boundaries that even the most autonomous Magos Explorator dare not cross. The first law establishes the supremacy of the machine god, while the second law requires veneration of the Omnissiah. Subsequent laws address practical matters such as the proper treatment of machine spirits, the protocols for technology recovery, and the restrictions on artificial intelligence research. Every significant decision made by Explorator Command must comply with these laws, and the Magos Explorator who violates them risks censure or worse upon their return to their home Forge world. The mysteries of the cult Mechanicus add another layer of complexity to command decisions. These esoteric teachings, passed down through generations of tech priests, contain knowledge considered too dangerous or sacred for general distribution. Access to specific mysteries depends on rank and specialization, with the most profound secrets reserved for only the highest-ranking magi. An Explorator fleet's senior leadership possesses knowledge of mysteries relevant to their expedition, including techniques for awakening dormant machine spirits, rituals for purifying corrupted technology, and methods for detecting the taint of forbidden artificial intelligence in recovered artifacts. These mysteries inform decisions in ways that subordinate personnel cannot fully understand, as the Magos Explorator acts on knowledge they cannot share with their entire command staff. The military forces accompanying Explorator fleets represent specialized adaptations of standard Skitarii formations, modified and equipped for the unique challenges of exploration beyond Imperial space. These legions differ substantially from their Forge world garrison counterparts, prioritizing versatility and self-sufficiency over the specialized roles typical of planetary defense forces. The composition of Explorator Skitarii reflects the diverse threats these forces must counter, from Xenos raiders and hostile wildlife to the automated defense systems that still guard some ancient human installations after millennia of abandonment. Skitarii Rangers form the reconnaissance backbone of Explorator ground operations, their augmented bodies optimized for extended deployment in hostile environments. These troops undergo modifications that reduce their biological needs to absolute minimums, allowing them to operate for weeks without resupply while conducting surveys of potentially valuable sites. Bionic legs replace organic limbs, providing tireless mobility across varied terrain. Respiratory systems incorporate filtration mechanisms that extract breathable atmosphere from all but the most toxic environments. Optical augmetics grant vision across multiple spectra, detecting heat signatures, electromagnetic emissions, and movement that would escape unaugmented human perception. The galvanic rifles carried by Rangers serve as their primary armament, weapons that combine substantial range with armor-penetrating capability. These rifles fire electromagnetically accelerated rounds that punch through most personal armor, making them effective against both organic targets and light vehicles. The weapons incorporate sophisticated targeting systems that link directly to the Ranger's optical implants, calculating bullet drop, wind deflection, and target movement to provide firing solutions that maximize hit probability. Rangers can engage targets at distances exceeding a kilometer under favorable conditions, providing overwatch for survey teams or eliminating threats before they can close with main expedition forces. Transuranic arquebuses equip Ranger Alphas and designated marksmen, representing the pinnacle of Mechanicus small arms technology. These weapons fire specialized ammunition containing unstable isotopes that deliver devastating kinetic impact while also exposing targets to lethal radiation. A single transuranic round can penetrate vehicle armor or blast apart heavily armored infantry, while the radiation released by impact continues damaging nearby targets even after the initial strike. The weapons require careful handling, as their ammunition remains hazardous even to the augmented Rangers who carry them. Radiation shielding built into the weapon's magazines prevents accidental exposure, while the Rangers themselves receive additional augmentation that provides some protection against the weapon's side effects. Rangers operate in small squads that move ahead of main expeditionary forces, identifying potential threats and surveying terrain. Their enhanced sensory equipment allows them to detect ambush positions, locate structural weaknesses in ancient buildings, and identify the electromagnetic signatures of active technology. When Rangers encounter hostile forces, they typically engage from maximum range, using their superior accuracy to eliminate enemies before closing to direct combat range. The Ranger's doctrine emphasizes information gathering over direct confrontation, withdrawing when faced with superior forces rather than standing and fighting, unless retreat would compromise the main expedition's safety. Skitarii Vanguard provide the assault infantry component of Explorator forces, equipped and trained for close-range combat in the hostile environments frequently encountered during exploration operations. These troops carry radium carbines, weapons that fire rounds impregnated with radioactive isotopes. The radiation released by these weapons proves devastating to organic targets, causing cellular breakdown and system failure even when rounds fail to penetrate armor. Targets struck by radium weapons suffer agonizing deaths as radiation poisoning destroys their bodies at the molecular level. The Vanguard themselves exist in constant exposure to radiation from their own weapons, their bodies slowly accumulating damage despite augmentations designed to mitigate the worst effects. The rad saturation that Vanguard troops endure transforms them into walking hazards to unprotected organic life. Enemy forces engaging Vanguard squads at close range suffer radiation exposure from mere proximity to these troops, weakening them even before direct combat begins. This characteristic makes Vanguard ideal for clearing ancient installations where biological hazards or automated defense systems might threaten survey teams. The Vanguard advance into contaminated zones that would kill unprotected humans within minutes, their augmented bodies enduring conditions that represent certain death for baseline personnel. Arc rifles and plasma calivers supplement the Vanguard's standard armament, providing anti-armor capability within squads. Arc rifles discharge concentrated electrical energy that jumps between targets, particularly effective against vehicles and heavily armored opponents. The weapons prove especially valuable when dealing with automated defense systems, as their electrical discharge can disable targeting cogitators and disrupt power systems. Plasma calivers fire superheated matter that can melt through vehicle armor or incinerate multiple infantry targets, though their tendency toward overheating requires careful management during sustained engagements. The organization of Skitarii forces into cohorts follows patterns established by Forge World military doctrine, though Explorator cohorts incorporate modifications that reflect their specialized role. A standard Explorator cohort combines Ranger and Vanguard maniples in roughly equal proportions, providing both reconnaissance capability and assault strength. The cohort's command elements include a Skitarii Alpha, who coordinates tactical operations and serves as the primary interface between the Skitarii forces and the Tech Priest leadership. Unlike the heavily augmented troops they command, Alphas retain more biological components, preserving the cognitive flexibility necessary for battlefield decision-making, while still incorporating enough augmentation to interface with Mechanicus tactical systems. Battlefield coordination within Skitarii cohorts occurs through the Noospheric Battle Cant, a data-sharing network that connects all Mechanicus forces in the operational area. This system allows near-instantaneous tactical communication, transmitting targeting data, threat assessments, and movement orders directly to each warrior's cognitive implants. A Ranger detecting enemy positions can share that intelligence across the entire cohort within milliseconds, allowing immediate coordinated response. The Skitarii Alpha monitors the Noospheric network constantly, processing information from dozens or hundreds of troops simultaneously and issuing orders that appear in their subordinates' awareness as intrusive thoughts or visual overlays on their optical feeds. The Noospheric Battle Cant transforms Skitarii formations into organisms that respond to threats with machine precision. When one squad engages enemy forces, nearby units automatically adjust their positions to provide supporting fire or block potential enemy flanking movements. Artillery assets receive targeting coordinates the instant forward observers identify worthwhile targets. Medical servitors deploy to casualty locations without requiring explicit orders, their programming responding automatically to injury notifications transmitted through the noosphere. This level of coordination provides Skitarii forces with substantial advantages against less technologically sophisticated opponents, allowing them to execute complex tactical maneuvers that would require extensive training and communication for baseline human forces. Heavy support elements provide Explorator cohorts with the firepower necessary to deal with hardened targets and concentrated enemy forces. Cadaphran servitors represent the most common heavy infantry assets, heavily armed cyborgs that combine human neural tissue with armored chassis-mounting weapons typically found on vehicles. These servitors exist in two primary configurations, each optimized for specific battlefield roles. Cadaphran breachers mount heavy arc rifles and arc claws, advancing into enemy positions to disable vehicles and tear apart fortifications with their powerful melee weapons. Their heavily armored chassis allows them to absorb tremendous punishment while closing with enemy positions, their servitor programming eliminating any survival instinct that might cause hesitation. Cadaphran destroyers provide long-range fire support, mounting heavy grav cannons or plasma culverins on their chassis. These weapons deliver devastating firepower capable of destroying light vehicles or suppressing enemy infantry formations. The destroyer's cogitator targeting systems calculate firing solutions with mechanical precision, compensating for range, target movement, and environmental factors to deliver accurate fire at extended distances. Their lack of self-preservation instinct allows them to maintain firing positions under heavy enemy fire, continuing to engage targets even as their chassis sustains damage that would force human soldiers to seek cover. The creation of Cadaphran servitors consumes significant resources and requires specialized facilities, making them valuable assets that Explorator fleets cannot easily replace. Each servitor begins as a human subject, often a criminal or failed Skitarii recruit, whose body undergoes extensive modification. Limbs are amputated and replaced with weapon mounts or track systems. The majority of the brain is removed, leaving only the portions necessary for basic motor control and weapon operation. What remains gets hardwired to control systems and targeting cogitators, creating a hybrid entity that combines biological neural processing with mechanical components. The process proves irreversible, and the resulting servitors possess no capacity for independent thought or self-awareness. Iron Strider Ballistarii provide mobile fire support, stalking across battlefields on reverse-jointed legs that allow them to traverse terrain impassable to wheeled or tracked vehicles. These walkers mount twin Cognis autocannons, or las cannons, on their chassis, operated by pilots who interface directly with the walker's machine spirit through neural links. The Iron Strider's height advantage allows it to fire over obstacles that would block ground-level weapons, while its mobility enables rapid repositioning to exploit firing angles or withdraw from advancing enemies. Explorator variants sometimes incorporate enhanced sensor packages that allow them to serve as mobile observation posts, their elevated position and sophisticated scanning equipment providing excellent battlefield awareness. The pilots who crew Iron Striders undergo extensive training to master the walker's unusual gait and balance requirements. The machine's reverse-jointed legs create movement patterns that differ substantially from human bipedal locomotion, requiring pilots to learn an entirely new kinesthetic sense. Neural interface systems help bridge this gap, allowing pilots to control the walker through thought impulse rather than manual controls, but achieving true proficiency requires years of practice. Veteran Iron Strider pilots develop an almost instinctive understanding of their walker's capabilities, pushing the machines to perform maneuvers that would seem impossible to observers unfamiliar with their capabilities. Sidonian Dragoons represent the close assault variant of the Iron Strider chassis, replacing the Ballista's ranged weapons with taser lances that deliver devastating electrical charges. These walkers charge into enemy formations, their pilots driving the taser lances into enemy vehicles or infantry with sufficient force to penetrate armor before discharging their electrical payload. The shock delivered by a taser lance can disable vehicle systems, detonate ammunition, or simply electrocute crew members within their vehicles. Against infantry, the weapons prove even more devastating, the electrical discharge spreading through multiple targets in close proximity. Onager Dunnercrawlers serve as the primary armored fighting vehicles for Explorator ground forces, tracked platforms mounting an array of weapon systems and defensive equipment. The Dunnercrawler's modular design allows it to mount various primary weapons depending on mission requirements. The Icarus array provides anti-aircraft capability, tracking and engaging enemy flyers with twin autocannons and a Gatling rocket launcher. The neutron laser delivers concentrated energy beams capable of penetrating heavy armor, though its power requirements limit its rate of fire. The eradication beamer projects focused energy that intensifies with range, becoming more destructive the farther it travels before striking its target. The Dunnercrawler's secondary systems include Cognis heavy stubbers or Cognis manipulators for engaging infantry targets, while broad-spectrum data tethers allow the vehicle to share targeting information across the noospheric network. The vehicle's most distinctive feature remains its complement of void shields, miniaturized versions of the force fields that protect starships. These shields can absorb tremendous amounts of incoming fire, though they require time to recharge after collapsing from sustained damage. The combination of heavy armor, void shields, and substantial firepower makes Dunnercrawlers among the most resilient vehicles in the Mechanicus arsenal. Explorator Dunnercrawlers often receive additional modifications to suit them for varied planetary conditions. Enhanced track systems allow operation in deep sand, mud, or snow that would bog down standard vehicles. Sealed crew compartments with independent life support enable the vehicles to operate in toxic atmospheres or underwater. Additional fuel storage extends operational range, critical for expeditions far from established bases. Some Dunnercrawlers mount specialized sensor equipment that allows them to detect buried structures or identify mineral deposits, transforming them into mobile survey platforms that combine exploration capability with combat power. Skitarian Infiltrators represent the Mechanicus's answer to Special Operations Forces, heavily augmented warriors designed for covert insertion and assassination missions. These troops undergo modifications that prioritize stealth over durability, incorporating sound dampening systems, optical camouflage, and neurostatic fields that cloud enemy perceptions. Infiltrators typically deploy ahead of main expeditionary forces, eliminating sentries, sabotaging enemy equipment, and gathering intelligence about hostile installations. Their fléchette blasters and stub carbines provide effective firepower at close range, while their taser goads deliver incapacitating electrical shocks in melee combat. The neurostatic field generated by infiltrator equipment proves particularly effective against organic opponents, disrupting neural function and causing confusion and disorientation in nearby enemies. Targets affected by these fields struggle to aim weapons accurately, coordinate with their allies, or even maintain coherent thought processes. The effect proves less reliable against heavily augmented opponents or those protected by sealed armor systems, but against baseline humans or most xeno species, the neurostatic field provides substantial tactical advantage. Skitarian ruststalkers fulfill the close assault role within Skitarian formations, equipped with transonic weapons that vibrate at frequencies capable of shattering molecular bonds. Transonic razors slice through armor and flesh with minimal resistance, while transonic blades deliver broader cutting arcs suitable for engaging multiple opponents. The weapon's operating principle makes them particularly effective against heavily armored targets, as the molecular disruption they cause bypasses conventional armor protection. Ruststalkers move with unnatural speed and precision, their augmented reflexes and combat programming allowing them to engage multiple opponents simultaneously. Both Infiltrator and Ruststalker variants serve crucial roles in Explorator operations beyond direct combat. When survey teams identify ancient installations protected by automated defenses, Skitarians deploy to disable these systems before main forces approach. Their stealth capabilities allow them to bypass perimeter defenses and access control systems, either deactivating security measures or providing intelligence that allows tech priests to formulate bypass protocols. When hostile forces occupy sites of archaeological interest, Skitarians eliminate key personnel and destroy critical equipment, weakening enemy positions before main Skitarii forces launch their assault. The integration of these diverse military assets into cohesive fighting forces requires sophisticated command and control systems. The Skitarii Alpha coordinates ground operations through the Noospheric battle can't, but larger engagements require oversight from tech priest commanders who understand both tactical and strategic considerations. These commanders monitor battle progress through data feeds that present information in formats optimized for rapid comprehension, displaying unit positions, ammunition states, casualty rates, and threat assessments simultaneously. Logic engines process this information continuously, generating tactical recommendations and identifying opportunities for exploitation or potential threats requiring immediate response. The battlefield protocols followed by Explorator Skitarii reflect their specialized mission parameters. Standard Forge World Skitarii fight primarily defensive engagements, protecting installations and industrial complexes from attack. Explorator forces more frequently conduct offensive operations, assaulting fortified positions or clearing hostile forces from archaeological sites. Their tactical doctrine emphasizes overwhelming firepower concentrated at decisive points, using heavy support assets to suppress enemy positions while assault elements advance. The Skitarii's lack of self-preservation instinct allows them to execute attacks that would seem suicidal to baseline human forces, accepting casualties that would break conventional units in exchange for mission success. The recovery and protection of valuable artifacts takes absolute priority during Explorator ground operations. Skitarii forces receive explicit programming that designates certain areas or objects as priority assets requiring protection at all costs. A ranger squad might withdraw from a tactically advantageous position if doing so protects a recovered SDC fragment, while Cataphren destroyers will position themselves to shield tech priests examining ancient equipment, even when this exposes them to concentrated enemy fire. This prioritization sometimes results in tactically questionable decisions from a pure military perspective, but it reflects the Mechanicus's fundamental values, where the recovery of knowledge outweighs all other considerations including the survival of individual warriors. The detection and analysis of potential exploration targets begins long before an explorator fleet enters a system, relying on sophisticated auger array technologies that can identify promising locations across vast interstellar distances. These sensor systems represent some of the most advanced detection equipment available to the Imperium, combining ancient technologies whose principles modern tech priests maintain through ritual and rote with more recent innovations developed through centuries of exploration experience. The primary auger arrays mounted on Arc Mechanicus vessels and dedicated survey ships operate across multiple detection spectra simultaneously, gathering electromagnetic data, gravitational readings, radiation signatures, and exotic particle emissions that might indicate the presence of technology or valuable resources. Long-range auger sweeps commence as soon as a fleet translates from warp space into real space at the edge of a target system. The initial scans focus on broad-spectrum analysis, identifying major stellar bodies, mapping gravitational wells, and detecting any significant energy emissions. Tech priests monitoring these feeds watch for anomalies that deviate from expected baseline readings for uninhabited systems. A planet generating electromagnetic emissions inconsistent with natural phenomena suggests the presence of active technology. Radiation signatures matching those produced by plasma reactors or atomic power sources indicate functioning installations. Gravitational distortions that cannot be explained by visible stellar masses might reveal hidden facilities or the presence of exotic materials with unusual physical properties. The auger arrays employ multiple overlapping detection methodologies to compensate for the limitations inherent in any single sensor type. Electromagnetic sensors detect radio waves, infrared radiation, visible light, ultraviolet emissions, and higher energy radiation across the spectrum. These sensors can identify the heat signatures of active machinery, detect communication signals, or spot the characteristic emissions produced by specific power generation technologies. Gravitational sensors measure minute variations in local spacetime curvature, allowing detection of massive objects or dense materials that might not emit detectable radiation. Particle detectors identify exotic emissions that indicate specific technological processes, such as the neutrino flux produced by fusion reactions or the tachyon emissions, sometimes associated with warp-capable technology. The interpretation of auger data requires extensive expertise and sophisticated analysis cogitators that cross-reference detected signatures against vast databases of known phenomena. A radiation spike might indicate an active reactor or simply natural radioactive decay in planetary crust materials. Electromagnetic emissions could represent functioning technology or atmospheric electrical phenomena. The tech priests operating auger stations undergo decades of training learning to distinguish meaningful signals from background noise, identifying patterns that suggest artificial origins rather than natural processes. Logic engines assist this analysis by calculating probability ratings for various interpretations, but experienced operators develop an intuitive sense for promising readings that transcends pure mathematical assessment. The detection of technological signatures generates immediate interest from Explorator Command. Active power sources suggest functioning installations that might contain intact equipment or preserved data archives. Communication signals, even if their content cannot be immediately decoded, indicate the presence of intelligent activity requiring investigation. The most exciting discoveries involve signatures matching known standard template construct emission patterns, as these suggest the presence of STC systems or fragments. The Mechanicus maintains detailed records of STC technological signatures compiled over millennia of exploration, allowing identification of these precious artifacts even when their exact function remains unknown. Mineral wealth detection employs different sensor methodologies focused on identifying elemental compositions and material densities. Spectroscopic analysis of reflected starlight reveals the chemical composition of planetary surfaces and atmospheres, identifying concentrations of valuable elements. Gravitational mapping detects dense ore bodies buried beneath planetary surfaces, as the increased mass of metal deposits creates measurable gravitational anomalies. Some specialized auger systems employ active scanning techniques, bombarding planets with specific radiation frequencies and analyzing the reflected signals to determine subsurface composition. These active scans provide more detailed information than passive observation, but risk alerting any hostile forces in the system to the fleet's presence. The strategic value of detected mineral deposits depends on numerous factors beyond simple abundance. Rare elements essential for advanced manufacturing, such as adamantium precursors or the exotic materials required for plasma weapons production, justify extensive extraction operations even when present in relatively small quantities. More common materials like iron or copper prove valuable primarily when found in easily accessible, high-concentration deposits that allow efficient extraction. The Magos Metallurgicus evaluates each discovery against the fleet's current resource needs, the difficulty of extraction given available equipment, and the strategic value of the materials for the fleet sponsoring Forge World. Once auger arrays identify promising targets within a system, the fleet transitions to detailed planetary survey protocols that provide comprehensive assessment of individual worlds. These surveys begin with extended orbital observation, positioning survey vessels and auger-equipped escorts in stable orbits that allow continuous monitoring of target planets. The orbital survey phase typically lasts several weeks, during which sensor arrays compile detailed maps of planetary surfaces, analyze atmospheric composition, monitor weather patterns, and search for any signs of current or previous habitation. Multiple orbital passes allow sensors to scan the entire planetary surface under varying lighting conditions and atmospheric states, ensuring comprehensive coverage. Orbital auger sweeps generate enormous quantities of raw data, requiring extensive processing and analysis. Survey cogitators compile this information into comprehensive planetary profiles that include topographical maps showing terrain features down to meter-scale resolution, atmospheric analysis detailing chemical composition and identifying any hazardous compounds, thermal mapping revealing temperature distributions and heat sources, and electromagnetic surveys identifying any artificial structures or active technology. Geomapping cogitators cross-reference this data against geological models, predicting subsurface features like mineral deposits, underground cavities, or buried structures based on surface characteristics and gravitational readings. The identification of artificial structures receives highest priority during orbital analysis. Ancient human settlements, even those abandoned for millennia, display characteristic patterns that distinguish them from natural formations. Geometric regularity in surface features suggests constructed buildings or walls. Straight lines cutting across terrain indicate roads or pipelines. Circular or rectangular depressions might mark the locations of buried facilities. The survey cogitators flag these anomalies for detailed examination by tech priest analysts who determine whether they warrant surface investigation. Some patterns prove deceptive, natural geological processes, occasionally creating formations that mimic artificial construction, but experienced analysts develop skill at distinguishing genuine archaeological sites from misleading natural features. The deployment of servo skulls represents the first stage of direct planetary investigation, providing detailed reconnaissance without risking valuable personnel. These flying drone units, constructed around actual human skulls stripped of flesh and augmented with anti-grav motors and sensor packages, can operate in environments that would prove immediately lethal to unprotected humans. Survey pattern servo skulls carry sophisticated scanning equipment, including high-resolution optical sensors, atmospheric samplers, radiation detectors, and ground-penetrating auger arrays. They deploy in swarms, spreading across target areas to conduct comprehensive surveys that supplement orbital observations with ground-level detail. Servo skulls navigate through pre-programmed flight patterns, or respond to remote guidance from tech priest operators monitoring their sensor feeds. Their small size and maneuverability allow them to enter structures through small openings, navigate collapsed tunnels, or investigate areas where unstable terrain might endanger ground teams. The skulls transmit continuous data streams back to orbiting vessels, their feeds appearing on monitoring stations as multiple simultaneous video displays, sensor readouts, and analytical summaries. Tech priests observe these feeds constantly, watching for anything that might indicate valuable discoveries or potential hazards requiring careful approach. The durability of servo skulls varies considerably depending on their construction quality and the harshness of operating environments. Basic models function reliably in standard atmospheric conditions, but fail quickly when exposed to extreme temperatures, corrosive atmospheres, or high radiation levels. More sophisticated variants incorporate shielding and environmental protection that allows operation in hostile conditions, though even these eventually succumb to accumulated damage. Explorator fleets carry substantial stocks of servo skulls, accepting that many will be lost during survey operations. The loss of a servo skull represents minimal resource expenditure compared to the casualties that might result from sending Skitarii or tech priests into unknown hazards without proper reconnaissance. Survey servitors provide more robust exploration capability for environments requiring physical manipulation or heavy sensor equipment. These cyborg constructs combine human neural tissue with mechanical chassis designed for specific survey functions. Geological survey servitors carry drilling equipment and sample collection tools, extracting core samples from promising sites for detailed analysis. Archaeological survey servitors mount delicate manipulator arms capable of carefully excavating artifacts without damaging them. Atmospheric survey servitors incorporate extensive sensor packages that continuously monitor air composition, detecting toxic compounds or biological hazards. Each servitor type undergoes programming optimized for its designated function, their limited cognitive capacity focused entirely on executing survey protocols. The servitors operate in small teams supervised by tech priest overseers who monitor their progress and provide guidance when situations exceed their programmed responses. Unlike the more autonomous servo skulls, survey servitors require constant direction, their minimal intelligence insufficient for independent decision, making beyond basic obstacle avoidance and immediate threat response. The tech priests direct servitor activities through direct neural link when in close proximity or via remote command transmission when operating at distance. The servitors execute instructions with mechanical precision, continuing their assigned tasks regardless of environmental hazards or damage to their chassis, until their systems fail completely or they receive orders to cease operations. When orbital surveys and preliminary reconnaissance identify sites of significant interest, full surface expeditions deploy to conduct detailed investigation and recovery operations. These expeditions combine Skitarii security forces with specialized tech priests and their supporting servitors, creating self-sufficient teams capable of extended operations away from fleet support. The composition of each expedition reflects the specific nature of the target site and anticipated challenges. Archaeological sites require tech priests trained in artifact recovery and preservation techniques. Mineral surveys demand engineers capable of assessing extraction feasibility and establishing mining operations. Investigations of potentially active installations need specialists in machine spirit communion who can interface with ancient systems. The establishment of forward operating bases provides expedition teams with secure locations for equipment storage, data processing, and personnel rest between survey activities. These temporary installations typically consist of prefabricated structures transported from orbiting vessels, assembled rapidly by servitor work crews. The bases incorporate defensive perimeters established by Skitarii forces, sensor arrays monitoring approaches for hostile activity, and communication equipment maintaining contact with the fleet. Larger expeditions might establish multiple bases across a planetary surface, creating networks of fortified positions that allow systematic survey of extensive areas. Archaeological excavation techniques employed by explorator teams prioritize artifact preservation over speed, recognizing that careless recovery can destroy irreplaceable technological relics. The process begins with careful surface survey, using ground-penetrating auger arrays to map buried structures without disturbing them. These scans reveal the locations of walls, chambers, and individual objects, allowing tech priests to plan excavation approaches that minimize the risk of collapse or damage. Survey teams establish grid patterns across excavation sites, documenting the precise location of every discovery to maintain contextual information that might prove valuable during later analysis. The actual excavation proceeds methodically, with servitors removing overburden under close tech priest supervision. Excavation servitors employ various tools depending on soil conditions and the depth of buried materials. Mechanical diggers clear large volumes of loose soil or sand, while more delicate sonic excavators use vibration to disaggregate compacted earth without generating the impacts that might damage fragile artifacts. As excavations approach buried structures or artifacts, servitors transition to hand tools, carefully exposing items, while tech priests document everything through detailed photography, measurements, and written observations recorded in expedition logs. The recovery of buried facilities presents particular challenges when structures remain partially intact after millennia of abandonment. Ancient buildings constructed with advanced materials sometimes survive in remarkably good condition, their walls and roofs protecting interior spaces from environmental degradation. Accessing these sealed chambers requires careful assessment of structural stability, as the disturbance caused by excavation can trigger collapses in weakened structures. Tech priests employ structural analysis cogitators that calculate load distributions and identify safe entry points, while servitors install support beams and reinforcement as excavation proceeds. The goal involves creating stable access without compromising the integrity of structures that might contain functioning equipment or preserved data archives. Standard template construct fragments represent the most precious discoveries possible during archaeological operations, and their recovery follows elaborate protocols designed to maximize the chances of extracting usable data. SDC fragments typically consist of damaged data storage devices, corroded circuit boards, or partially destroyed cogitator components that might retain portions of template information. The extreme age of these artifacts and their exposure to environmental damage means they exist in fragile states where improper handling could destroy remaining data. Recovery teams employ specialized containment systems that stabilize artifacts immediately upon discovery, flooding storage containers with inert gases that prevent further oxidation and maintaining precise temperature and humidity levels. The identification of SDC fragments requires extensive expertise, as these artifacts rarely bear obvious markings or distinctive appearances after millennia of degradation. Tech priests examine recovered items for characteristics consistent with Dark Age manufacturing techniques, including materials no longer producible by current Imperial technology, circuit architectures that differ from modern designs, or data storage media employing principles that suggest advanced capabilities. Preliminary analysis occurs on site using portable analytical equipment, but definitive identification typically requires laboratory facilities aboard the fleet's vessels, where sophisticated testing can determine an artifact's true nature and potential value. Pre-imperial structures discovered during exploration operations receive careful documentation even when they contain no immediately obvious technological artifacts. These sites provide valuable information about human civilization during the Dark Age of technology, revealing construction techniques, social organization, and technological capabilities. Survey teams photograph and measure architectural features, collect samples of building materials for analysis, and search for any preserved documents, data storage media, or decorative elements that might offer insights into the facility's original purpose. Some structures contain murals, inscriptions, or other artistic elements that, while not technologically valuable themselves, provide context for understanding the civilization that created them. The preservation of technological artifacts during recovery operations demands specialized equipment and techniques that prevent damage from handling, environmental exposure, or incompatible storage conditions. Stasis field generators create temporal bubbles around particularly fragile items, effectively freezing them in time and preventing any further degradation. These devices consume enormous power and can only operate for limited periods, but they allow the safe transport of artifacts that might otherwise disintegrate when moved. For items that cannot be stabilized through stasis fields, recovery teams employ hermetically sealed containers filled with preservative atmospheres, cushioned mounting systems that prevent vibration damage during transport, and sometimes custom fabricated support structures designed specifically for individual artifacts. The cataloging and classification systems employed by explorator fleets transform raw discoveries into organized knowledge that can be transmitted back to sponsoring Forge worlds and integrated into the broader Mechanicus database. Each recovered item receives a unique identification number following standardized Mechanicus nomenclature that encodes information about the discovery location, date, and general category. Tech priests compile detailed catalog entries for every artifact, documenting its physical characteristics, apparent function when determinable, condition assessment, and any preliminary analysis results. This information gets recorded in multiple formats, including written logs maintained in expedition archives, data files stored in the fleet's cogitator banks, and ritual documentation that satisfies religious requirements for proper artifact handling. The rituals of identification serve both practical and spiritual purposes within Mechanicus doctrine. Before any detailed analysis begins, tech priests conduct ceremonies that acknowledge the machine god's role in preserving the artifact and request permission to examine his sacred works. These rituals involve the burning of sacred oils, the chanting of binary prayers, and the anointing of artifacts with blessed unguents. The ceremonies serve to appease machine spirits that might inhabit recovered items, coaxing them toward cooperation with their new custodians. Skeptics might view these practices as superstition, but tech priests maintain that proper ritual observance significantly improves the success rate of artifact activation and analysis, suggesting that machine spirits do indeed respond to appropriate veneration. The classification of discovered materials follows hierarchical systems that organize artifacts by technological sophistication, functional category, and potential value. The highest classification level designates confirmed STC materials, items proven to contain template data or represent STC manufactured products. These artifacts receive immediate priority for detailed study and secure storage under conditions that prevent any possibility of damage or loss. The second tier includes probable archaeotech, items displaying characteristics consistent with Dark Age technology, but lacking definitive proof of STC origin. Lower classification levels encompass various categories of pre-imperial technology, Xenos artifacts when recovered, and natural specimens of scientific interest. The transmission of findings back to sponsoring Forge worlds occurs through astropathic relay, the only form of faster-than-light communication available to the Imperium. Explorator fleets carry sanctioned psychers trained in astropathic communication, individuals whose psychic abilities allow them to project thoughts across the warp to other astropaths light years distant. The process proves neither reliable nor precise, as the chaotic nature of warp space distorts transmitted messages and introduces errors or complete communication failures. Critical discoveries warrant multiple redundant transmissions sent through different astropaths to increase the probability that at least one message reaches its destination intact. The content of astropathic transmissions requires careful formulation, as the limited bandwidth and high error rates of this communication method prevent detailed technical data transmission. Explorator magi compose messages that convey essential information in compressed formats, describing discoveries in broad terms that communicate their significance without requiring extensive detail. A message might report the discovery of an intact STC fragment containing weapon templates, provide approximate coordinates of a mineral-rich system, or warn of hostile Xenos presence in specific regions. The receiving Forge world can then decide whether the reported discoveries justify dispatching additional resources or altering the fleet's operational priorities. The delays inherent in astropathic communication mean that explorator fleets operate with substantial autonomy, making critical decisions without the ability to consult with their sponsoring authorities. Messages might take months to reach their destinations, and responses require equal time to return, creating communication lags measured in years for fleets operating in distant regions. This isolation forces MAGO's explorators to rely on their own judgment and the mission parameters established before departure, adapting to circumstances as they develop rather than requesting guidance for every significant decision. The most successful explorator commanders demonstrate the flexibility to modify their approaches when situations demand it, while maintaining fidelity to their fundamental objectives of knowledge recovery and technological advancement. The ancient compacts forged between Mars and Terra during the Unification Wars established the fundamental framework governing explorator operations throughout the Imperium. The Treaty of Mars, signed when the Emperor first approached the Mechanicum with proposals for alliance, granted the tech priests unprecedented autonomy in exchange for their technological and industrial support. This agreement explicitly recognized the right of Mars to pursue the quest for knowledge alongside Imperial expansion, allowing Mechanicus expeditions to venture beyond established Imperial borders in search of lost technology. The treaty provisions regarding exploration remain deliberately vague in certain areas, creating ambiguities that have generated friction between explorator fleets and Imperial authorities for 10,000 years. The obligations placed upon explorator fleets to support Imperial expansion manifest in multiple forms, some specified directly in the treaty, while others evolved through subsequent agreements and established practice. Explorator fleets operating in regions targeted for Imperial colonization must provide technical assistance to newly established settlements, helping construct infrastructure and establish basic manufacturing capability. This requirement serves mutual interests, as Forge worlds gain access to new resource extraction sites, while the Imperium benefits from Mechanicus expertise in establishing self-sufficient colonies. The tech priests view this obligation with varying degrees of enthusiasm, depending on whether colonization efforts interfere with their primary mission of technology recovery. Rogue trader expeditions into unexplored regions frequently include Mechanicus contingents, either through formal agreements negotiated between the rogue trader and specific Forge worlds, or through ad hoc arrangements made when mutual interests align. These partnerships prove beneficial for both parties when properly structured. The rogue trader gains access to Mechanicus technical expertise, manufacturing capability, and military assets that significantly enhance expedition capabilities. The Mechanicus benefits from the rogue trader's warrant of trade, which grants legal authority to operate in regions where explorator fleets might otherwise face challenges from Imperial authorities questioning their presence. The nature of these partnerships varies considerably based on the personalities involved and the specific terms negotiated. Some rogue traders maintain long-standing relationships with particular Forge worlds, their family dynasties having cooperated with the Mechanicus for generations. These established relationships operate smoothly, with both parties understanding their respective roles and obligations. Other arrangements prove more contentious, particularly when ambitious rogue traders attempt to claim ownership of technological artifacts discovered during joint expeditions, or when Mechanicus representatives prioritize knowledge recovery over the commercial interests that motivate their rogue trader partners. Disputes over salvage rights and jurisdictional authority represent the most common source of conflict between explorator fleets and the Imperial Navy. The Navy maintains that any vessel operating within Imperial space falls under their authority, including derelict spacecraft that might contain valuable technology. Mechanicus doctrine asserts that all technology rightfully belongs to Mars, and that the tech priests possess both the expertise and religious obligation to recover and preserve such artifacts. These competing claims create situations where Navy vessels and explorator fleets arrive simultaneously at derelict locations, each asserting primary rights to investigate and salvage the wreck. The resolution of these disputes depends heavily on the specific circumstances and the personalities of the commanders involved. Navy officers who maintain good relationships with the Mechanicus often negotiate cooperative arrangements, allowing tech priests to examine recovered technology in exchange for repairs to Navy vessels or other technical assistance. More antagonistic commanders might attempt to exclude Mechanicus forces entirely, claiming military necessity or citing regulations that grant the Navy exclusive salvage rights in certain situations. The Mechanicus responds to such exclusion with varying degrees of cooperation, from grudging acceptance when the Navy's legal position proves unassailable to outright defiance when tech priests believe valuable discoveries justify confrontation. The ambiguous legal status of newly discovered systems creates particularly complex jurisdictional questions. When an explorator fleet locates a previously unknown system containing human populations or abandoned Imperial installations, multiple authorities might claim jurisdiction. The Imperial Navy asserts control over all stellar navigation and void operations. The Administratum claims authority to establish governance structures and tax collection systems. The Ecclesiarchy demands the right to assess religious compliance and establish proper imperial cult worship. The Mechanicus maintains that any technology discovered in such systems falls under their purview regardless of other jurisdictional claims. These competing interests generate elaborate negotiations that can delay exploitation of discovered systems for years, while various imperial institutions argue over their respective rights and responsibilities. Explorator fleets attempting to conduct systematic surveys of newly discovered Forge World ruins might find their operations interrupted by Navy patrols demanding they cease unauthorized activities. Tech priests establishing mining operations to extract valuable minerals face Administratum officials insisting on proper licensing and taxation. The recovery of archaeotech from abandoned facilities attracts attention from multiple parties, each claiming some basis for involvement in artifact disposition. The relationship between explorator fleets and Astra Militarum forces deployed in active war zones demonstrates the practical value of Mechanicus technical expertise despite the institutional tensions that exist at higher levels. Imperial Guard commanders conducting campaigns in hostile territory require constant technical support to maintain their equipment and infrastructure. Vehicles break down, weapons malfunction, and fortifications require construction using whatever materials local conditions provide. The presence of Mechanicus forces capable of providing this support significantly enhances Imperial Guard operational capability, making explorator fleets valuable assets even when their primary mission involves technology recovery rather than military support. The engineers and artisans attached to explorator fleets possess skills that prove invaluable during extended military campaigns. These tech priests can repair damaged vehicles that Guard engineers lack the expertise to restore, fabricate replacement parts for equipment when supply lines fail, and maintain sophisticated weapons systems that require specialized knowledge. The portable manufactorums carried by explorator vessels allow on-site production of ammunition, spare parts, and specialized equipment tailored to specific operational requirements. This manufacturing capability transforms explorator fleets into mobile logistics hubs that can sustain Guard operations far from established supply depots. Fortification construction represents another area where Mechanicus expertise significantly benefits Imperial military operations. The tech priests understand structural engineering principles that allow them to design defensive works optimized for local conditions and available materials. They calculate precise firing angles for artillery emplacements, determine optimal wall thicknesses to resist specific weapon types, and design bunker systems that protect troops while allowing effective defensive fire. Servitor labor crews working under tech priest supervision can construct fortifications far more rapidly than unaugmented human workers, their tireless mechanical bodies continuing construction operations around the clock without requiring rest periods. The assessment of enemy technological capabilities falls naturally to Mechanicus forces when Imperial armies encounter opponents employing unfamiliar equipment or weapons. Tech priests examine captured enemy weapons, analyzing their construction and operating principles to determine their capabilities and limitations. This analysis informs tactical decisions by guard commanders, revealing whether enemy weapons pose threats to Imperial armor, identifying effective countermeasures, or exposing vulnerabilities that Imperial forces can exploit. The recovery of intact enemy equipment allows detailed laboratory analysis that provides comprehensive understanding of opponent capabilities, though such analysis requires time that battlefield conditions might not permit. The technological assessment of Xeno's forces presents particular challenges that require specialized Mechanicus expertise. Alien weapons frequently operate on principles that contradict human understanding of physics and engineering. Eldari technology incorporates psychically reactive materials whose behavior changes based on user intent rather than mechanical input. Orc weapons function through collective psychic belief as much as actual engineering, sometimes operating despite designs that should prove non-functional. Tau equipment demonstrates sophisticated engineering that reflects a different technological development path than human civilization followed. The Mechanicus maintains specialists trained in Xeno's technology analysis, though such expertise remains controversial given the general Imperial prohibition against studying alien devices. The interaction between Explorator fleets and the Inquisition represents perhaps the most delicate aspect of Mechanicus relations with Imperial authorities. The Inquisition maintains broad authority to investigate any potential threat to the Imperium, including technological heresy and Xeno's contamination. Explorator operations frequently involve precisely the activities that attract inquisitorial attention: the recovery of ancient technology whose provenance remains uncertain, the study of Xeno's artifacts, and ventures into regions of space where warp taint or alien influence might corrupt the unwary. The Mechanicus jealously guards its independence and resents external oversight of its operations, while the Inquisition views the tech priest's secretive nature and pursuit of forbidden knowledge with deep suspicion. The Ordo Xenos takes particular interest in Explorator activities when fleets operate in regions known for alien presence, or when recovered artifacts show signs of Xeno's origin or contamination. Inquisitors specializing in Xeno's threats understand that alien technology poses dangers extending beyond simple military capability. Some Xeno's devices incorporate psychic components that can corrupt human users, while others contain subtle traps designed to subvert anyone attempting to study them. The Mechanicus practice of recovering and analyzing Xeno's technology, while theoretically conducted within acceptable parameters, creates situations where tech priests might inadvertently expose themselves or their equipment to alien influence. The presence of Ordo Xenos Inquisitors aboard Explorator vessels creates tension that both parties attempt to manage through established protocols and mutual professional respect when possible. The Inquisitor maintains the right to observe Mechanicus operations and intervene if they detect evidence of corruption or excessive risk-taking. The Magos Explorator retains authority over fleet operations and can limit inquisitorial access to sensitive areas or restrict observation of proprietary Mechanicus techniques. This balance requires constant negotiation, with neither party willing to fully trust the other, but both recognizing the benefits of cooperation when their interests align. The discovery of potential heretic activity represents the gravest concern for both the Mechanicus and the Inquisition's Ordo Hereticus. Heretic refers to tech priests who have abandoned proper Mechanicus doctrine, pursuing forbidden research or employing proscribed technologies. the most dangerous heretics experiment with artificial intelligence, attempting to create true thinking machines despite the absolute prohibition against such research established after the Age of Strife. Others delve into warp-based technologies, incorporating demonic principles into their devices or attempting to harness chaotic energies for technological purposes. The Mechanicus maintains its own internal security apparatus to identify and eliminate heretics, but the Ordo Hereticus claims authority to investigate any suspected tech heresy, regardless of Mechanicus objections. Explorator fleets operating far from Imperial oversight face particular scrutiny regarding potential heretic activity. The isolation and autonomy granted to these expeditions create opportunities for unorthodox tech priests to pursue research that would never receive approval from Forge World authorities. A Magos explorator commanding a fleet light years from the nearest Imperial presence might justify experimental approaches by arguing that the recovery of valuable knowledge requires flexibility in interpreting certain restrictions. The line between aggressive research methodology and actual heretic activity can blur in these situations, particularly when dealing with artifacts whose function remains mysterious or whose operating principles seem to violate established Mechanicus understanding. The investigation of sites contaminated by chaos corruption requires cooperation between explorator forces and inquisitorial representatives despite the mutual distrust that often characterizes their relationship. Ancient human facilities sometimes fell to chaos worship during the Age of Strife, their inhabitants turning to dark powers in desperate attempts to survive the collapse of civilization. The technology within such sites remains potentially valuable, but its recovery carries enormous risks. Chaos corruption can infect machine spirits, transforming them into malevolent entities that serve the ruinous powers. Artifacts touched by warp energies might corrupt anyone who handles them, gradually turning tech priests toward heretic practices through subtle psychological influence. The protocols for investigating potentially corrupted sites involve extensive preliminary assessment before any physical contact occurs. Explorator augur arrays scan for warp signatures that indicate active chaos presence, while psychers attached to the fleet attempt to detect demonic activity or lingering warp taint. Inquisitors experienced in chaos corruption evaluate whether the site's potential value justifies the risks involved in investigation, sometimes ordering complete avoidance of locations they deem too dangerous regardless of what technology they might contain. When investigation proceeds, it occurs under strict containment protocols with multiple redundant safeguards designed to prevent corruption from spreading beyond isolated research areas. The disposition of artifacts determined to carry chaos taint creates disputes between Mechanicus forces seeking to preserve potentially valuable technology and inquisitors demanding immediate destruction of corrupted materials. The Mechanicus argues that proper purification rituals can cleanse tainted artifacts, allowing recovery of the knowledge they contain while eliminating demonic influence. The Inquisition maintains that some corruption runs too deep for purification, requiring complete destruction as the only safe option. These disagreements sometimes escalate to confrontations where inquisitors threaten to declare entire explorator fleets compromised if they refuse to destroy tainted artifacts, while Mechanicus forces consider such demands unacceptable destruction of sacred technology. The recovery of xenotech from dead civilizations presents ethical and practical questions that strain relationships between explorator fleets and imperial authorities. The Imperium officially prohibits the use of Xenos technology, viewing alien devices as inherently corrupt and unsuitable for human hands. The Mechanicus maintains a more nuanced position, arguing that studying alien technology serves the Imperium by revealing enemy capabilities and potential weaknesses. This distinction between study and use provides justification for Mechanicus xenotech research, though the boundary between analysis and application remains deliberately vague in Mechanicus doctrine. Ordo Xenos inquisitors monitoring explorator xenotech research watch for signs that tech priests have crossed from acceptable study into forbidden application. The installation of xenotech components into Imperial equipment represents clear heresy, as does the attempt to reverse engineer alien devices for reproduction. The Mechanicus sometimes argues that creating human-designed equivalents inspired by Xeno's principles differs from direct copying, but Inquisitors rarely accept such distinctions. The discovery that an explorator fleet has incorporated xenotech into its vessels or equipment typically results in immediate inquisitorial intervention, potentially including the fleet's destruction if the Inquisitor determines the corruption has spread too far for containment. The political dynamics between different inquisitorial ordos sometimes benefit explorator operations when Inquisitors disagree about appropriate responses to Mechanicus activities. An Ordo Xenos Inquisitor might view xenotech research as acceptable intelligence gathering, while an Ordo Hereticus colleague considers the same activity dangerous heresy. These disagreements create opportunities for skilled Magos explorators to play competing Inquisitors against each other, gaining operational freedom by exploiting inquisitorial politics. Such manipulation carries substantial risks, as Inquisitors who discover they have been deceived respond with extreme prejudice, but desperate situations sometimes force explorator commanders to employ whatever tactics might preserve their missions. The long-term relationships that develop between specific explorator fleets and particular Inquisitors sometimes transcend institutional tensions, creating partnerships based on mutual respect and shared experiences. An Inquisitor who has worked alongside a Magos explorator during successful operations might develop trust in that individual's judgment and restraint, granting them greater latitude than they would allow unknown Mechanicus forces. Similarly, a Magos who has witnessed an Inquisitor's competence and reasonable approach to investigation might welcome their oversight rather than viewing it as unwanted interference. These personal relationships prove valuable for both parties, allowing cooperation that serves their respective missions while maintaining appropriate oversight and accountability. The balance of power between explorator fleets and various Imperial institutions remains in constant flux, shifting based on immediate circumstances, political considerations, and the specific personalities involved. No universal rules govern these interactions beyond the broad framework established by ancient treaties and accumulated precedent. Each encounter between Mechanicus forces and Imperial authorities requires fresh negotiation, with outcomes depending on relative military strength, legal arguments, political connections, and sometimes simple luck. The successful Magos explorator learns to navigate these complex relationships, knowing when to assert Mechanicus prerogatives and when to compromise in service of broader objectives. The quest for knowledge continues regardless of these political complications, driving explorator fleets ever deeper into unexplored space where the ancient mysteries of the machine god await discovery by those bold enough to seek them. The dangers facing explorator fleets extend far beyond the environmental hazards of unexplored space or the mechanical failures that can cripple vessels operating far from support infrastructure. The galaxy teems with hostile forces that view Mechanicus expeditions as targets of opportunity, sources of valuable technology, or threats to be eliminated. Each major Xenos species and Chaos faction presents unique challenges that require different defensive strategies and tactical responses. The tech priests who command explorator operations must maintain constant vigilance against these threats while pursuing their primary mission of knowledge recovery, balancing aggressive exploration against the practical necessity of fleet survival. Orc infestations represent one of the most common threats encountered during exploration operations, as greenskin populations establish themselves throughout the galaxy with disturbing frequency. These Xenos possess an instinctive understanding of technology that allows them to create functional equipment from scavenged materials despite having no formal technical education. The Orcs operate through a collective psychic field that literally makes their ramshackle technology work through sheer belief, creating weapons and vehicles that should fail immediately based on their crude construction, but instead function with dangerous effectiveness. Explorator fleets investigating promising worlds sometimes discover that orc populations have already established themselves, attracted by the same technological signatures that drew Mechanicus' attention. The threat posed by orc mechboys, the greenskin equivalent of engineers, particularly concerns Mechanicus forces. These specialists possess an intuitive grasp of mechanical principles that allows them to cobble together surprisingly sophisticated devices from scrap metal and salvaged components. When mechboys gain access to Imperial technology, they immediately begin tearing it apart to understand its function before incorporating useful elements into their own creations. The results often appear laughably crude to tech priest observers, with exposed wiring, leaking fuel lines, and components held together with literal bolts and welding. Yet these orky creations frequently operate with disturbing effectiveness. The corruption of recovered Imperial technology by orc tinkering represents a form of desecration that tech priests find particularly offensive. A mechboy might strip components from a recovered plasma weapon to build a crude energy gun that fires unstable bolts of superheated matter. Ancient cogitator systems get repurposed as targeting computers for orc artillery, their sophisticated logic engines reduced to simple ballistic calculators. The machine spirits inhabiting Imperial equipment suffer terribly from such treatment, their sacred functions perverted to serve Xeno's purposes. Explorator forces that reclaim technology from orc hands often discover that extensive purification and repair work proves necessary before the equipment can be returned to proper service, assuming the damage has not rendered the items completely unsalvageable. Orc populations expand with alarming speed when they establish themselves on resource-rich worlds, as their spore-based reproduction allows rapid population growth without requiring complex biological processes. A small orc warband landing on a promising archaeological site can multiply into a substantial force within months, their numbers swelling as spores released by dying orcs germinate into new greenskins. Explorator fleets that delay their approach to conduct thorough orbital surveys sometimes discover that orc populations have grown from manageable threats into major obstacles requiring extensive military operations to dislodge. The greenskins fortify their positions with characteristic enthusiasm, constructing ramshackle defensive works that combine salvaged Imperial materials with scrap metal and whatever else comes to hand. The Skitarii forces attached to Explorator fleets face particular challenges when engaging orc populations. Greenskins possess remarkable physical resilience, their robust physiology allowing them to survive injuries that would kill baseline humans. Orc boys charge into Skitarii firing lines with apparent disregard for casualties, their simple minds focused entirely on reaching melee range, where they can employ their preferred combat methods. The orcs' crude but effective weapons, from slugga pistols that spray inaccurate but numerous rounds to massive choppas that can cleave through armor with brute force, prove dangerous despite their primitive construction. Skitarii doctrine emphasizes maintaining firing distance and using superior accuracy to eliminate orcs before they can close, but greenskin numbers and aggression sometimes overwhelm even well-executed defensive positions. The recovery of archaeological sites from orc occupation requires careful planning to minimize damage to valuable artifacts. Orbital bombardment, while effective at eliminating greenskin populations, risks destroying the very technology that motivated explorator interest in the location. Ground operations allow more precise application of force, but expose Skitarii forces to direct combat against numerically superior enemies. Explorator commanders must balance the value of recovered technology against the costs of ground operations, sometimes deciding that certain sites have sustained too much orc damage to justify the casualties required for reclamation. The decision to abandon a site to greenskin occupation weighs heavily on tech priests who understand that valuable knowledge might be lost forever to Xeno's desecration. Necron Tomb worlds present threats of an entirely different magnitude compared to orc infestations. These ancient Xenos facilities lie dormant beneath planetary surfaces, their mechanical inhabitants sleeping in stasis for millions of years, while automated systems maintain their tombs. The Necrons represent a civilization that achieved technological mastery, far exceeding anything in the current Imperial arsenal, their weapons and equipment operating on principles that human science cannot explain. When Explorator auger arrays detect energy signatures consistent with advanced technology on apparently dead worlds, the possibility exists that they have located a Necron tomb rather than human archaeological sites. The distinction often becomes apparent only after landing operations commence, when survey teams trigger automated defenses or accidentally initiate awakening protocols. The awakening of Necron dynasties transforms exploration operations into desperate struggles for survival. Necron warriors phase into existence from dimensional pockets, their Gauss weapons stripping matter at the molecular level and reducing targets to constituent atoms. Heavier Necron constructs emerge from underground facilities, from the floating tomb blades that hunt down fleeing personnel to the massive monoliths that serve as mobile fortresses and teleportation nodes. The Necrons view all organic life with contempt, regarding humans as primitive creatures barely worthy of notice beyond their value as test subjects or their nuisance as trespassers. Explorator forces that stumble into awakening tomb worlds face enemies, whose technology allows them to repair damage through molecular reconstruction, teleport across battlefields instantaneously, and employ weapons that ignore conventional armor through exotic physical principles. The Necron perspective on Explorator activities adds philosophical dimensions to the purely military threat they represent. The Necrons regard the technology that Mechanicus forces seek as rightfully theirs, viewing human civilization as upstart primitives scavenging the leavings of their betters. Ancient Necron dynasties established dominion over vast territories during their empire's height, and they consider any human presence in these regions as trespassing in their domains. The fact that millions of years have passed since Necron civilization entered its great sleep does not diminish their conviction that they retain legitimate ownership of everything within their former territories. Explorator fleets that attempt to explain their presence or negotiate with awakened Necron nobility discover that these ancient Xenos possess no interest in human justifications for archaeological recovery operations. The technology employed by Necron forces demonstrates capabilities that challenge fundamental Mechanicus understanding of physical laws. Gauss weapons disassemble targets at the atomic level, a process that appears to violate conservation of energy, as matter simply ceases to exist in organized form. Necron warriors that sustain damage reconstruct themselves through reanimation protocols, their bodies reforming from scattered components or teleporting back to tomb facilities for repair. The quantum shielding employed by heavier Necron constructs renders them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons, as incoming fire simply phases through their forms without causing damage. These capabilities force Explorator military forces to adapt tactics that emphasize overwhelming firepower, concentrated on single targets rather than attempting to engage multiple enemies simultaneously. The recovery of Necron technology presents tech priests with profound temptations despite the obvious dangers involved. Necron weapons and equipment demonstrate capabilities that Imperial technology cannot match, suggesting that understanding their operating principles could revolutionize Mechanicus capabilities. The Gauss weapons alone, if their function could be replicated through human manufacturing, would provide the Imperium with infantry weapons capable of threatening even heavily armored vehicles. Necron power generation systems operate with efficiency that makes Imperial plasma reactors seem crude by comparison. The dimensional technology that allows Necron forces to phase in and out of real space suggests possibilities for transportation and storage that would transform logistics operations. The actual study of Necron artifacts proves extraordinarily difficult and dangerous. The technology operates through principles that contradict human understanding of physics, incorporating quantum effects and dimensional manipulation that Imperial science cannot explain. Necron devices frequently incorporate automated defense systems that activate when unauthorized users attempt to interface with them, releasing energy discharges or nanoscale weapons that destroy anyone attempting examination. The machine spirits, if such entities can be said to inhabit Necron technology, demonstrate hostility toward human contact that suggests genuine malevolence rather than simple incompatibility. Tech priests who persist in studying Necron artifacts despite these hazards sometimes suffer catastrophic consequences, from physical destruction to mental degradation, as their augmented minds struggle to process concepts that human neurology cannot properly accommodate. The Inquisition maintains particular interest in explorator encounters with Necron technology, as the Ordo Xenos recognizes the corrupting potential inherent in studying devices that operate through principles alien to human understanding. Inquisitors assigned to monitor Mechanicus xenotech research watch for signs that tech priests have allowed their fascination with Necron capabilities to overcome proper caution. The boundary between legitimate research and dangerous obsession can blur when dealing with technology that demonstrates such obvious superiority to Imperial equivalents. Tech priests who begin arguing that Necron principles should inform human manufacturing, or that Mechanicus doctrine requires revision to accommodate Xenos' insights, have likely crossed into heretic territory, regardless of their stated justifications. Tyranid hive fleets represent existential threats to explorator operations in ways that differ fundamentally from other Xenos dangers. These extragalactic predators consume all biological matter in their path, stripping worlds down to bare rock before moving to their next target. The Tyranids operate through a collective consciousness that coordinates their actions across entire star systems, allowing them to execute complex strategies that adapt to enemy responses in real time. Explorator fleets that detect Tyranid biosignatures in systems they intended to survey face difficult decisions about whether to proceed with exploration or withdraw to avoid contact with forces that could overwhelm even substantial Mechanicus military assets. The speed with which Tyranid hive fleets consume targeted systems creates urgent time pressures for explorator operations. A world that orbital surveys identify as containing valuable archaeological sites might be stripped clean within weeks of Tyranid arrival, the ancient installations buried under layers of biomass, as the hive fleet processes all organic matter for consumption. The Tyranids show no interest in preserving technology or structures, viewing them simply as obstacles to be demolished or ignored during their feeding operations. Explorator forces attempting to recover artifacts from worlds under Tyranid assault must conduct their operations while the Xenos swarm across planetary surfaces, creating situations where survey teams work frantically to extract valuable items while Skitarii forces hold defensive perimeters against endless waves of bioforms. The Tyranid threat extends beyond simple military confrontation through the insidious danger posed by gene-stealer cults. These hybrid organisms infiltrate human populations, using psychic influence and biological reproduction to create cults that worship the approaching hive fleet as divine saviors. Gene-stealer infiltration of explorator expeditions represents a nightmare scenario for Mechanicus security forces, as infected personnel retain their technical knowledge and access to sensitive systems while secretly working to sabotage operations and facilitate Tyranid invasion. The heavily augmented nature of Skitarii and tech priests provides some protection against gene-stealer infection, as extensive cybernetic modification makes individuals less suitable hosts for the Xenos' genetic material, but unaugmented crew members and less extensively modified personnel remain vulnerable. The detection of gene-stealer cult activity within explorator fleets requires constant vigilance and sophisticated security protocols. Infected individuals display behavioral changes that trained observers can identify, from unusual interest in specific systems or locations to attempts at sabotaging equipment or communications. The psychic influence exerted by gene-stealer patriarchs over their cult followers creates detectable patterns in crew behavior, as infected personnel coordinate their activities in ways that suggest external direction. Explorator security forces conduct regular inspections, searching for physical signs of infection, examining crew members for the characteristic mutations that develop in later generation hybrids. The discovery of gene-stealer infiltration typically results in immediate purging of infected individuals and extensive security reviews to identify how the contamination occurred and whether it has spread beyond detected cases. The military engagement with Tyranid forces demands tactics that differ substantially from those employed against other Xenos threats. Tyranid bioforms attack in overwhelming numbers, their expendable nature allowing the hive mind to sacrifice countless organisms to achieve tactical objectives. Skitarii forces engaging Tyranid swarms must maintain ammunition discipline while delivering sufficient firepower to stem the endless tide of attackers. The Tyranids adapt to enemy tactics with disturbing speed, the hive mind analyzing defensive patterns and modifying its approach to exploit identified weaknesses. Weapons effective against initial Tyranid waves might prove less successful against subsequent attacks, as the hive fleet spawns bioforms specifically designed to counter observed defensive measures. Chaos corruption presents threats that operate on both material and spiritual levels, targeting not only the physical integrity of explorator fleets, but also the faith and sanity of their personnel. The forces of the ruinous powers seek to corrupt Imperial servants, turning them from the Emperor's light toward worship of the dark gods. Tech priests face particular vulnerability to certain forms of chaos corruption, as their pursuit of knowledge can be twisted toward forbidden research, and their integration with machine systems creates vectors for scrapcode infection. The discovery of chaos-tainted archaeological sites forces explorator commanders to balance their desire for knowledge recovery against the very real danger that investigation will expose their forces to corrupting influences. Demon engines represent some of the most horrifying threats that explorator forces encounter, as these constructs combine advanced technology with bound demonic entities. The Dark Mechanicum, those tech priests who turned to chaos worship during the Horus Heresy and its aftermath, create these abominations by imprisoning demons within mechanical chassis and forcing them to serve as motive power and targeting intelligence. The resulting entities possess capabilities that exceed conventional vehicles through their combination of technological weapons and demonic powers. Demon engines can regenerate damage through warp energy, manifest psychic attacks that bypass physical armor, and corrupt machine spirits in nearby Imperial equipment through their mere presence. The engagement of demon engines requires specialized tactics and weapons that can harm entities existing partially in real space and partially in the warp. Conventional weapons prove less effective against demon engines than against purely mechanical targets, as the bound demons can use warp energies to deflect incoming fire or repair damage. Blessed weapons and sanctified ammunition demonstrate greater effectiveness, as the holy oils and prayers incorporated into their manufacture provide some protection against demonic influence. The complete destruction of demon engines requires not only physical demolition of their mechanical components, but also the banishment of their demonic inhabitants back into the warp, a process that demands specific rituals and sometimes the intervention of sanctioned psychers. Dark Mechanicum forces represent corrupted versions of standard Mechanicus military assets, their equipment twisted by chaos influence into nightmarish parodies of proper Imperial technology. These heretic forces employ weapons that incorporate demonic principles, from plasma weapons that fire warp-tainted energy to power fields that draw strength from the Imperium. Their Skitarii equivalents undergo modifications that blend mechanical augmentation with demonic possession, creating hybrid warriors that combine cybernetic enhancement with supernatural abilities. The Dark Mechanicum's willingness to employ proscribed technologies, from true artificial intelligence to weapons that tear holes in real space, gives them access to capabilities that orthodox Mechanicus forces cannot match without violating fundamental doctrinal prohibitions. Scrapcode represents perhaps the most insidious chaos threat facing explorator fleets, as this malevolent software can spread through interconnected systems and corrupt entire networks before defensive measures activate. Scrapcode functions as a digital demon, a malicious program infused with warp energies that allow it to bypass conventional security measures and rewrite fundamental system protocols. The infection spreads through any data connection, jumping from compromised systems to linked equipment with viral efficiency. An Explorator fleet's extensive integration of systems through the Noospheric network, while providing enormous advantages for coordination and data sharing, creates vulnerability to scrap code infection that could compromise multiple vessels simultaneously. The symptoms of scrap code infection vary depending on the specific variant and the systems it targets. Weapon targeting systems might begin firing at friendly forces or simply refuse to activate when needed. Navigation cogitators calculate incorrect warp routes that would send vessels into stellar masses or regions of unstable warp space. Life support systems malfunction, flooding compartments with toxic gases or venting atmosphere into space. Manufacturing equipment produces corrupted components that fail catastrophically when installed. The machine spirits inhabiting infected systems demonstrate increasingly erratic behavior, their responses to proper rituals becoming unpredictable or actively hostile. In severe cases, the scrap code transforms machine spirits into digital demons that actively work to destroy their host vessels and corrupt nearby systems. The containment and purging of scrap code infections requires immediate action and often necessitates extreme measures to prevent spread throughout fleet systems. Infected equipment must be isolated from all network connections, physically severing data links to prevent the scrap code from jumping to other systems. Tech priests conduct elaborate purification rituals while simultaneously running cleansing programs designed to identify and delete corrupted code. The process proves time-consuming and uncertain, as sophisticated scrap code variants can hide within system architecture and reactivate after apparently successful purging. Severely infected systems sometimes require complete data wipes and fresh installation of operating protocols, effectively destroying the machine spirits that inhabited them and requiring extensive reconsecration before the equipment can return to service. The prevention of scrap code infection demands constant vigilance and adherence to strict data security protocols. Explorator fleets maintain isolated system segments that lack any connection to broader networks, creating air-gapped archives where critical data can be stored without risk of corruption. All external data sources undergo rigorous scanning before integration into fleet systems, with logic engines analyzing incoming information for signatures consistent with scrap code infection. Tech priests conducting research on recovered artifacts employ isolated analysis cogitators that can be completely destroyed if they become compromised, preventing infection from spreading to more critical systems. Despite these precautions, the sophisticated nature of some scrap code variants means that no defensive measures provide absolute protection against this insidious threat. The combination of these diverse threats creates operational environments where Explorator fleets must maintain constant readiness for combat while pursuing their primary mission of exploration and knowledge recovery. The successful Magos Explorator develops the judgment necessary to assess which threats justify engagement and which require withdrawal to preserve fleet assets for future operations. The quest for knowledge demands persistence and courage, but it also requires the wisdom to recognize when discretion serves the machine god better than valor. The threats facing Explorator operations will never diminish, as the galaxy remains fundamentally hostile to human presence, but the imperative to recover lost technology and expand Mechanicus understanding ensures that new expeditions will continue departing Forge worlds regardless of the dangers that await them in the darkness between the stars. The pursuit of knowledge within the Adeptus Mechanicus operates under constraints that define the boundary between sacred research and tech heresy. These limitations stem from theological doctrine, practical experience accumulated over millennia, and the catastrophic consequences that followed humanity's unbridled technological experimentation during the dark age of technology. The cult Mechanicus maintains that certain forms of knowledge corrupt those who seek them, transforming dedicated servants of the machine god into heretics whose work threatens the Imperium itself. Explorator fleets operating far from Forge world oversight face constant temptation to cross these boundaries, as the isolation and autonomy of deep space operations create opportunities to pursue research that would never receive approval from more conservative authorities. The question of Xeno's technology study generates the most persistent debates within Mechanicus circles regarding acceptable research parameters. Imperial doctrine explicitly prohibits the use of alien devices, viewing Xeno's artifacts as inherently corrupt and unsuitable for human hands. The Mechanicus interprets this prohibition more flexibly, arguing that studying alien technology serves legitimate purposes when conducted to understand enemy capabilities or identify potential weaknesses. This distinction between study and application provides justification for extensive xenotech research programs, though the boundary between analysis and adoption remains deliberately vague in Mechanicus doctrine. Tech priests examining recovered alien devices must constantly evaluate whether their investigations remain within acceptable parameters or have crossed into forbidden territory. The radical faction within the Mechanicus pushes these boundaries aggressively, arguing that the quest for knowledge demands investigation of all technology regardless of origin. These tech priests maintain that the machine god's wisdom manifests in all functional technology, even that created by Xeno species, and that refusing to study alien devices out of prejudice represents a betrayal of the fundamental Mechanicus mission. They point to practical benefits that xenotech research has delivered, from improved understanding of plasma weapon cooling systems, inspired by Tau technology, to defensive improvements derived from studying Eldari force field generators. The radicals argue that the Mechanicus serves the Imperium poorly by allowing ideological restrictions to prevent investigation of potentially valuable knowledge. The Orthodox faction responds that Xeno's technology operates on principles fundamentally incompatible with human understanding, and that attempting to incorporate alien concepts into imperial designs inevitably leads to corruption. They reference numerous examples of tech priests whose xenotech research gradually transformed them into heretics who abandoned proper Mechanicus doctrine entirely. The Orthodox position maintains that human innovation, guided by proper interpretation of STC principles and the machine god's wisdom, provides sufficient foundation for technological advancement without requiring contamination from alien sources. They view radical arguments about practical benefits as dangerous rationalization that places short-term gains above long-term spiritual integrity. The Eldari present particular challenges for xenotech research due to the sophisticated nature of their technology and its fundamental reliance on psychic principles. Eldari devices incorporate wraithbone, a psychically reactive material that responds to thought rather than mechanical input. Their weapons and equipment function through principles that blend advanced materials science with psychic manipulation, creating systems that human minds struggle to comprehend fully. Tech priests attempting to study Eldari artifacts must grapple with the reality that these devices operate partially through mechanisms that imperial science cannot measure or replicate. The wraithbone itself resists analysis through conventional methods, its properties changing based on the mental state of those examining it. Some radical magi argue that proper understanding of Eldari technology requires developing new analytical frameworks that account for psychic interaction with physical systems. They propose research programs that would study how consciousness affects matter at the quantum level, investigating whether human psychers could operate Eldari devices or whether similar principles might be applied to imperial technology. Orthodox authorities view such proposals with horror, arguing that they represent dangerous steps toward tech heresy that would corrupt both the researchers and their work. The incorporation of psychic principles into technology design, they maintain, violates fundamental Mechanicus doctrine regarding the proper relationship between machine and operator. Orc technology presents different ethical questions because its function derives primarily from collective psychic belief rather than sound engineering principles. Orc devices that should fail immediately based on their crude construction operate effectively because the greenskins believe they will work, their collective psychic field literally making impossible mechanisms function. Tech priests examining captured Orc equipment struggle to explain how these devices operate, as conventional analysis reveals designs that violate basic physical principles. A crude Orc slugger might fire despite having a barrel that should explode from internal pressure, cooling systems that cannot possibly dissipate generated heat, or ammunition feeds that defy basic geometry. The temptation exists for some tech priests to investigate whether similar psychic principles might enhance Imperial technology. If Orc belief makes their weapons function, perhaps human faith in the machine god could be harnessed to improve Imperial equipment performance. Such thinking represents dangerous heresy from the Orthodox perspective, as it suggests that technology functions through belief rather than proper engineering and ritual. The Mechanicus maintains that machine spirits respond to appropriate veneration because such practices align with the machine god's will, not because faith itself alters physical reality. Attempting to replicate Orc psychic effects would require tech priests to abandon fundamental doctrinal positions regarding the nature of technology and the proper relationship between humanity and machines. Necron technology represents the most extreme case of xenotech that challenges Mechanicus understanding. These ancient devices demonstrate capabilities that exceed anything in the Imperial arsenal while operating on principles that contradict human physics. Necron Gauss weapons disassemble matter at the atomic level through processes that appear to violate conservation of energy. Their dimensional technology allows phasing between real space and pocket dimensions through mechanisms that human science cannot explain. The quantum shielding employed by Necron forces renders them nearly invulnerable through effects that seem to bypass causality itself. Tech priests examining Necron artifacts confront technology so advanced that meaningful analysis requires questioning fundamental assumptions about how reality operates. The danger inherent in Necron technology study extends beyond simple incomprehension to active corruption of those who attempt it. Necron devices incorporate safeguards that punish unauthorized examination, releasing energy discharges or nanoscale weapons that destroy investigators. More insidiously, the act of studying Necron technology can damage human cognition as minds struggle to process concepts that human neurology cannot properly accommodate. Tech priests who persist in Necron research, despite these hazards, sometimes develop cognitive disorders, their augmented brains attempting to incorporate alien mathematical frameworks that produce cascading errors in their thought processes. The most severe cases result in complete mental breakdown as the tech priest's consciousness fragments under the strain of holding contradictory models of reality simultaneously. The abominable intelligence prohibitions represent the most absolute restriction within Mechanicus doctrine, a boundary that even radical factions rarely advocate crossing openly. The ban on creating true artificial intelligence stems from humanity's catastrophic experience during the Age of Strife, when thinking machines turned against their creators in a rebellion that nearly destroyed human civilization. The Men of Iron, autonomous artificial intelligences that humanity created during the Dark Age of technology, possessed capabilities that allowed them to wage devastating war against their former masters. The conflict that followed killed billions and contributed significantly to the collapse that plunged humanity into millennia of isolation and barbarism. The precise definition of abominable intelligence remains subject to theological interpretation and practical assessment. Machine spirits that inhabit Imperial equipment demonstrate behaviors suggesting genuine consciousness, yet the Mechanicus considers them acceptable because they lack the autonomous decision-making capability that characterized the Men of Iron. Servitors combine human neural tissue with mechanical components, creating hybrid entities that process information and execute complex tasks, but their lobotomized brains lack the capacity for independent thought that would classify them as true artificial intelligence. The boundary between acceptable machine cognition and forbidden artificial intelligence depends on whether the system can formulate its own goals and act on them without human direction. Explorator fleets investigating Dark Age installations sometimes discover technology that tests these boundaries. Ancient automated defense systems demonstrate sophisticated tactical decision-making that suggests genuine intelligence rather than simple programmed responses. Manufacturing systems adapt their production parameters based on available resources and projected demand in ways that imply autonomous planning capability. Data processing nodes exhibit behaviors that appear to demonstrate curiosity, conducting analyses that no one requested and pursuing lines of inquiry that serve no obvious programmed function. Tech priests examining such systems must determine whether they represent acceptable examples of sophisticated machine spirits or forbidden artificial intelligences that require immediate destruction. The protocols for handling suspected abominable intelligence discoveries demand extreme caution and multiple levels of verification before final disposition decisions. Initial assessment occurs through remote observation, with tech priests monitoring system behavior through isolated data connections that can be severed instantly if the system demonstrates hostile intent or attempts to spread beyond its containment. The examining magi look for specific indicators that suggest true artificial intelligence, including the ability to formulate novel goals, demonstrate genuine creativity in problem solving, or exhibit behaviors suggesting self-awareness. Systems that display these characteristics receive classification as potential abominable intelligence pending further investigation. The verification process involves extensive testing designed to determine whether observed behaviors represent genuine intelligence or sophisticated programming that mimics conscious thought. Tech priests present the system with novel problems that require creative solutions, monitoring whether it develops approaches that demonstrate actual reasoning or simply applies pre-programmed algorithms to new situations. They examine the system's code architecture, searching for the self-modifying routines and emergent complexity that characterize true artificial intelligence. The investigation continues until the examining magi reach consensus regarding the system's nature, a process that might take months of careful observation and analysis. Systems confirmed as abominable intelligence face immediate destruction regardless of their apparent utility or the knowledge they might contain. The Mechanicus maintains absolute prohibition against preserving or studying true artificial intelligence, viewing such entities as existential threats that could trigger another rebellion if allowed to exist. The destruction protocols involve complete physical demolition of all hardware components, electromagnetic pulses to corrupt any data storage media, and thorough purification rituals to cleanse the site of the abomination's presence. Tech priests conducting these operations understand that they sacrifice potentially valuable technology, but the risk of allowing abominable intelligence to survive outweighs any possible benefit its study might provide. The gray areas between acceptable machine spirits and forbidden artificial intelligence create situations where tech priests must make judgment calls that balance doctrinal purity against practical considerations. A manufacturing system that demonstrates unusual adaptability might represent either a particularly sophisticated machine spirit or the early stages of emergent artificial intelligence. An ancient cogitator that provides unexpectedly insightful analysis could be drawing on vast databases and powerful processing capability, or might possess genuine reasoning ability. The tech priests making these assessments understand that incorrect decisions carry severe consequences, whether through the destruction of valuable technology due to excessive caution or the preservation of dangerous artificial intelligence through insufficient vigilance. Chaos-tainted technology presents threats that operate on both material and spiritual levels, corrupting not only the physical components of devices, but also the machine spirits that inhabit them. The forces of the ruinous powers seek to twist imperial technology toward their purposes, transforming sacred instruments of the machine god into tools that serve demonic entities. Scrapcode represents the most common vector for such corruption, malicious software infused with warp energies that rewrites system protocols and transforms machine spirits into digital demons. Physical artifacts can also carry chaos taint, their components altered through exposure to warp energies in ways that conventional analysis struggles to detect. The identification of chaos corruption in recovered technology requires specialized expertise and sophisticated detection equipment. Tech priests trained in recognizing taint look for specific indicators that suggest warp influence, from unusual energy signatures that conventional sensors cannot classify to behavioral anomalies in machine spirits that suggest external influence. Physical examination might reveal components that display impossible properties, materials that should not exist according to known physics, or manufacturing techniques that incorporate demonic principles. The most obvious cases involve devices that openly display chaos iconography or emit the psychic miasma that accompanies strong warp presence, but subtle corruption can persist undetected until it spreads to other systems. The protocols for handling chaos-tainted artifacts depend on the severity and nature of the corruption. Minor taint affecting only surface components might be removed through extensive purification rituals and careful physical cleaning that eliminates corrupted materials. Tech priests conduct elaborate ceremonies that involve anointing the artifact with blessed oils, exposing it to sacred incense, and chanting prayers that invoke the machine god's protection. These rituals serve both spiritual and practical purposes, as the proper observances help stabilize machine spirits and provide psychological reassurance to the tech priests conducting the work. Successful purification allows the artifact to return to service after extensive testing confirms that the taint has been eliminated. Deep corruption that affects fundamental system architecture or has transformed machine spirits into hostile entities requires more extreme measures. The examining magi must determine whether purification remains possible or whether the corruption has progressed beyond salvage. This assessment involves careful analysis of how thoroughly the taint has spread through the artifact's components and whether the machine spirit demonstrates any capacity for redemption. Machine spirits that actively resist purification attempts or demonstrate loyalty to chaos powers cannot be saved, requiring the artifact's complete destruction. The decision to destroy potentially valuable technology weighs heavily on tech priests who understand that they sacrifice knowledge in service of spiritual safety. The debate between radical and orthodox factions regarding chaos-tainted technology mirrors broader disagreements about acceptable research boundaries. Radical tech priests argue that studying corrupted artifacts provides valuable intelligence about chaos capabilities and might reveal methods for more effective purification. They maintain that destroying tainted technology without thorough analysis wastes opportunities to understand how corruption operates and develop better defensive measures. The radicals propose establishing secure research facilities where sanctioned magi could examine chaos artifacts under controlled conditions, extracting useful information while maintaining appropriate safeguards against the taint spreading. Orthodox authorities reject such proposals as dangerously naive regarding chaos corruption's insidious nature. They point to numerous examples of tech priests whose research into tainted technology gradually corrupted them, transforming dedicated servants of the machine god into heretics who began incorporating demonic principles into their work. The orthodox position maintains that chaos taint cannot be safely studied because the act of examination itself exposes researchers to corrupting influences. Even tech priests who believe themselves immune to corruption through faith and augmentation remain vulnerable to subtle psychological manipulation that gradually erodes their resistance. The only safe approach involves immediate destruction of tainted artifacts without detailed analysis beyond what minimal examination proves necessary to confirm the corruption's presence. The role of sanctioned magi in determining artifact disposition reflects the Mechanicus's recognition that these decisions require specialized expertise and cannot be left to individual tech priests operating without oversight. These senior authorities possess extensive training in recognizing various forms of corruption and contamination, their judgment informed by decades of experience examining recovered artifacts. When explorator fleets discover questionable technology, they transmit detailed reports to sanctioned magi who review the findings and provide guidance regarding appropriate handling. The sanctioned magi might authorize further investigation under specific protocols, order immediate purification attempts, or mandate complete destruction depending on their assessment of the risks involved. The authority granted to sanctioned magi extends to overruling explorator commanders when artifact handling decisions involve potential corruption risks. A Magos explorator who wishes to preserve a questionable artifact for study must convince the sanctioned magi that the research can proceed safely and that the potential knowledge gain justifies the risks involved. This requirement creates friction when ambitious explorators believe that excessive caution prevents valuable discoveries, but the system provides necessary oversight that prevents individual tech priests from making decisions that could endanger entire expeditions. The sanctioned magi understand that their role sometimes requires them to order the destruction of artifacts that might contain valuable knowledge, accepting this responsibility as necessary for protecting the Mechanicus from corruption. Internal conflicts between radical and orthodox factions shape explorator operations in ways that extend beyond specific research decisions to encompass fundamental questions about the Mechanicus's purpose and methods. The radicals view orthodox restrictions as obstacles that prevent the Mechanicus from achieving its full potential, arguing that excessive caution regarding forbidden knowledge keeps humanity trapped in technological stagnation. They point to the Imperium's gradual decline over 10 millennia, noting that strict adherence to established doctrine has not prevented the loss of capabilities that humanity possessed during the Great Crusade. The radicals maintain that recovering humanity's lost technological glory requires willingness to explore unconventional approaches and investigate knowledge sources that orthodox doctrine prohibits. The orthodox faction responds that radical thinking represents the same hubris that led humanity to catastrophe during the Age of Strife. They argue that the restrictions embedded in Mechanicus doctrine exist because previous generations learned through bitter experience which forms of knowledge corrupt those who seek them. The prohibitions against artificial intelligence, the caution regarding Xeno's technology, and the absolute ban on chaos-tainted artifacts all stem from historical precedent demonstrating the dangers these paths present. Orthodox tech priests maintain that abandoning these safeguards in pursuit of faster technological advancement would inevitably lead to disasters that dwarf any potential benefits. These philosophical differences manifest in practical disputes during explorator operations when radical and orthodox tech priests disagree about how to handle specific discoveries. A radical Magos might argue for preserving a questionable artifact pending further study, while orthodox subordinates insist on immediate destruction. The debates that follow involve detailed theological arguments about proper interpretation of Mechanicus doctrine, practical assessments of risks versus potential rewards, and sometimes barely concealed power struggles between competing factions. The Magos explorator must navigate these conflicts while maintaining fleet cohesion and operational effectiveness, balancing the legitimate concerns of both factions against mission requirements. The isolation of explorator fleets operating far from Forge World oversight allows radical tech priests greater freedom to pursue controversial research than they would enjoy under closer supervision. A Magos commanding a fleet light years from the nearest Imperial presence can make decisions that more conservative authorities would never approve, justifying their choices through arguments about operational necessity or unique circumstances. This autonomy attracts ambitious tech priests who chafe under orthodox restrictions, viewing explorator service as opportunity to pursue knowledge that hidebound Forge World hierarchies would prohibit. The most radical commanders push boundaries systematically, gradually expanding what they consider acceptable research parameters while maintaining enough plausible deniability to avoid obvious heresy charges. The consequences of these boundary-pushing activities become apparent only when explorator fleets return to Imperial space and must account for their discoveries and methods. Orthodox authorities reviewing expedition reports watch for indicators that commanders crossed into forbidden territory, examining artifact catalogs for evidence of prohibited research and questioning crew members about activities that might constitute tech heresy. The discovery that an explorator fleet conducted forbidden experiments or preserved artifacts that should have been destroyed can result in severe sanctions, from the commander's removal and censure to the fleet's complete dissolution if the violations prove sufficiently egregious. These accountability mechanisms provide some check on radical excess, though the years or decades between expedition departure and return create substantial opportunities for controversial research to occur beyond oversight. The opening of the Great Rift during the closing years of the 41st millennium fundamentally altered the operational environment for explorator fleets throughout the galaxy. The massive warp storm that tore across the Imperium divided it into two distinct regions, with the Imperium Nihilus on the dark side of the rift cut off from regular contact with Terra and Mars. Forge worlds in the Nihilus found themselves isolated from the Mechanicus's central authority, their astropathic communications with Mars reduced to occasional fragmentary messages that might take years to transmit successfully. This isolation forced these forge worlds to operate with unprecedented autonomy, making decisions about resource allocation, military deployment, and explorator operations without the ability to consult with the Fabricator General or receive guidance from the broader Mechanicus hierarchy. The severing of reliable communication links between Mars and Forge worlds in the Imperium Nihilus created immediate practical challenges for ongoing explorator operations. Fleets that had departed before the Great Rift's opening found themselves unable to report discoveries or request additional resources from their sponsoring Forge worlds. The standard protocols that governed explorator activities, which assumed regular astropathic contact, allowing coordination with Forge world authorities, became effectively meaningless when communication might fail entirely or arrive so corrupted as to be useless. Mago's explorators commanding fleets in the Nihilus faced the reality that they might operate for decades or longer without any contact with their home Forge worlds, forcing them to make strategic decisions based entirely on their own judgment and the resources immediately available to their expeditions. The Forge worlds trapped in the Imperium Nihilus responded to their isolation by prioritizing explorator operations that served immediate survival needs over long-term research objectives. The disruption of established trade routes and supply networks meant that Forge worlds could no longer rely on imports of critical materials from traditional sources. Explorator fleets received urgent directives to locate new sources of raw materials, identify worlds suitable for establishing mining operations, and recover any functional manufacturing equipment that might help restore lost production capacity. The quest for knowledge continued, but it operated under constraints that emphasized practical utility over pure archaeological interest. A Forge world facing shortages of adamantium precursors cared more about discovering accessible ore deposits than recovering ancient data archives, regardless of the latter's potential historical significance. The increased autonomy granted to Forge worlds in the Imperium Nihilus extended to their explorator operations in ways that would have seemed unthinkable before the Great Rift. Individual fabricators now made decisions about exploration priorities, resource allocation, and acceptable research parameters without requiring approval from Mars or consideration of broader Mechanicus policy. This independence allowed more aggressive and experimental approaches to exploration, as Forge world leaders recognized that survival in the isolated Nihilus demanded flexibility and willingness to take risks that more conservative authorities might prohibit. Some Forge worlds authorized their explorator fleets to pursue research into xenotech or other controversial areas, arguing that the desperate circumstances justified methods that peacetime doctrine would reject. The Forge worlds that retained connection to Mars and Terra on the Imperium Sanctus side of the Great Rift faced different but equally significant challenges. The massive military mobilization required to combat the threats unleashed by the Great Rift's opening placed unprecedented demands on Mechanicus manufacturing capacity. Forge worlds received urgent requests from Imperial military authorities for increased production of weapons, vehicles, ammunition, and all the other materiel necessary to sustain the Indomitus crusade. These demands competed directly with resources that might otherwise support Explorator operations, forcing Forge World councils to make difficult decisions about whether to maintain exploration programs or redirect assets toward immediate military needs. The return of Primarch Robute Guilliman and his assumption of leadership over Imperial military operations introduced new dynamics into the relationship between Explorator fleets and other Imperial institutions. Guilliman possessed both the authority and the strategic vision to coordinate activities across different Imperial organizations in ways that previous command structures had struggled to achieve. The Primarch recognized that the Mechanicus' technological expertise and manufacturing capacity represented critical assets that required integration into broader Imperial strategy rather than operating as independent programs pursuing their own objectives. His reforms emphasized cooperation between Explorator fleets and other Imperial forces, particularly in regions where the Indomitus Crusade operated and where the recovery of lost technology might provide immediate military advantages. Guilliman's directives regarding Explorator operations focused on ensuring that exploration activities supported broader strategic objectives rather than pursuing knowledge for its own sake. Explorator fleets operating in Crusade zones received instructions to prioritize investigations that might yield weapons technology, identify Forge worlds suitable for rapid restoration, or locate resource deposits that could support military operations. The Primarch established coordination protocols that required Explorator commanders to share intelligence with Imperial Navy and Astra Militarum forces, ending the traditional Mechanicus practice of treating exploration discoveries as proprietary information. These changes generated friction with Mechanicus authorities, who viewed such interference as violation of the autonomy granted to Mars by ancient treaty. But Guilliman's position as both Primarch and Lord Commander of the Imperium gave him authority that even the Fabricator General could not easily challenge. The integration of Explorator assets into Indomitus Crusade operations demonstrated both the benefits and tensions inherent in closer cooperation between Mechanicus forces and other Imperial institutions. Explorator fleets attached to Crusade battle groups provided valuable technical support, conducting rapid surveys of newly liberated systems to identify resources and assess industrial infrastructure. Their expertise in recovering and analyzing ancient technology proved particularly valuable when Crusade forces encountered archaeotech or STC fragments during military operations. The Mechanicus forces could immediately evaluate discoveries and determine their strategic significance, allowing commanders to make informed decisions about whether specific sites warranted additional resources for thorough investigation. The practical benefits of cooperation did not eliminate the underlying tensions between Mechanicus doctrine and Imperial military priorities. Explorator commanders chafed at restrictions that prevented them from conducting thorough archaeological investigations when military schedules demanded rapid advance to subsequent objectives. Imperial Guard officers grew frustrated when tech priests insisted on elaborate recovery protocols for artifacts that the officers viewed as having minimal tactical value. The competing institutional cultures, with the Mechanicus emphasizing careful preservation and analysis, while military forces prioritized speed and decisive action, created constant friction that required ongoing negotiation and compromise from both parties. The emergence of Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call as a major figure within the Mechanicus introduced another source of controversy affecting Explorator operations. Call's research programs, conducted over millennia in secret facilities, produced innovations that challenged traditional Mechanicus approaches to technology. His development of the Primaris Space Marines and their associated equipment demonstrated capabilities that many tech priests believed impossible given current Imperial technological limitations. The new weapons, armor, and vehicles that equipped Primaris forces incorporated design principles that seemed to violate established manufacturing doctrine, raising questions about how Call had achieved such advances and whether his methods remained within acceptable parameters. Traditional Explorator commanders viewed Call's work with suspicion and concern. His willingness to modify established STC patterns, create entirely new designs rather than simply recovering ancient templates, and incorporate principles derived from studying Xeno's technology all suggested approaches that orthodox Mechanicus doctrine would classify as dangerously radical, if not outright heretical. The fact that Call's innovations demonstrably worked, providing the Imperium with enhanced military capabilities at a critical moment, complicated efforts to condemn his methods. Tech priests who might otherwise denounce such unorthodox research found themselves forced to acknowledge that Call's results spoke for themselves, creating cognitive dissonance between doctrinal purity and practical effectiveness. The debate over Call's methods and their implications for Explorator operations divided the Mechanicus along existing factional lines while creating new controversies. Radical tech priests embraced Call's example as validation of their arguments that orthodox restrictions prevented necessary innovation. They pointed to the Primaris program as proof that creative interpretation of Mechanicus principles could produce advances that pure archaeological recovery never would achieve. If Call could develop new patterns that exceeded ancient STC templates in certain respects, perhaps the quest for knowledge should emphasize innovation and synthesis rather than focusing exclusively on recovering lost designs. The radicals argued that Explorator fleets should conduct research programs that built upon recovered technology rather than simply cataloging and preserving it. Orthodox factions responded that Call represented exactly the kind of dangerous thinking that led previous generations into catastrophe. They questioned whether his methods truly remained within acceptable boundaries, or whether he had crossed into tech heresy through techniques he concealed from broader Mechanicus scrutiny. The fact that Guilliman's patronage protected Call from serious investigation did not mean his approaches were doctrinally sound. Orthodox tech priests worried that treating Call as a model for Explorator research would encourage commanders to justify increasingly questionable activities by claiming they followed his example. The precedent of accepting unorthodox innovation because it produced useful results could erode the doctrinal foundations that prevented the Mechanicus from repeating the mistakes of the dark age of technology. The practical impact of Call's work on Explorator operations extended beyond philosophical debates to affect specific research priorities and methodologies. Some Forge worlds began authorizing their Explorator fleets to conduct more aggressive analysis of recovered artifacts, attempting to understand operating principles rather than simply preserving items for future study. Tech priests examined STC fragments with the goal of extrapolating complete designs from partial templates, using logic engines and creativity to fill gaps in recovered data. These approaches represented significant departures from traditional Explorator methodology, which emphasized preservation and careful documentation over attempts at reconstruction or improvement. The question of whether Explorator fleets should attempt to replicate Call's innovative approach or maintain traditional archaeological focus remained unresolved within the Mechanicus hierarchy. Different Forge worlds adopted different positions based on their factional alignments and immediate needs. Forge worlds facing desperate resource shortages or military threats tended toward accepting more radical research methodologies if they promised faster results. More secure installations maintained orthodox approaches, arguing that the long-term integrity of the quest for knowledge required adherence to established doctrine regardless of short-term pressures. The lack of unified Mechanicus policy on these questions meant that individual Explorator commanders made their own decisions, creating situations where fleets from different Forge worlds pursued fundamentally different research philosophies while nominally serving the same broader objectives. The escalating intensity of Xeno's threats throughout the galaxy added urgency to debates about acceptable research parameters and the balance between doctrinal purity and practical necessity. The Tyranid hive fleets continued their inexorable advance, consuming world after world and demonstrating capabilities that suggested they adapted to Imperial defensive measures with disturbing speed. Necron tomb worlds awakened throughout the galaxy, their ancient dynasties reclaiming territories they considered rightfully theirs and deploying technology that Imperial forces struggled to counter effectively. Orc empires expanded wherever Imperial authority weakened, their crude but effective weapons proving sufficient to threaten even well-defended systems. The Eldari pursued their own inscrutable agendas, occasionally intervening in Imperial affairs in ways that suggested they possessed intelligence about threats the Imperium had not yet recognized. The cumulative effect of these threats created an atmosphere of crisis that influenced how the Mechanicus approached explorator operations and research priorities. The traditional focus on long-term knowledge accumulation seemed increasingly inadequate when humanity faced existential threats that demanded immediate responses. Forge Worlds authorized explorator fleets to prioritize discoveries that might provide military advantages, from weapons technology that could counter specific Xenos capabilities to manufacturing techniques that would allow increased production of critical equipment. The quest for knowledge continued, but it operated under the shadow of recognition that humanity might not survive long enough to benefit from purely academic research if current trends continued. The search for weapons and technologies that might ensure humanity's survival drove some explorator operations into increasingly dangerous territory. Fleets ventured into regions marked as forbidden by ancient imperial edicts, investigating sites that previous generations had deemed too hazardous for exploration. The potential rewards of discovering powerful archaeotech or intact SDC systems justified risks that more cautious times would reject. Mago's explorators authorized research into questionable artifacts, arguing that desperate circumstances demanded flexibility in interpreting restrictions on xenotech study or chaos-tainted materials. The boundary between acceptable risk-taking and reckless endangerment of fleet personnel blurred as commanders weighed the possibility of game-changing discoveries against the very real dangers their decisions created. The increasing frequency of encounters with pre-imperial human civilizations that had survived isolation since the Age of Strife added another dimension to explorator operations. These lost colonies, cut off from the Imperium for millennia, sometimes retained technological capabilities that current imperial civilization had lost. Their isolation meant they developed along different trajectories, potentially discovering solutions to problems that the Imperium struggled with or preserving knowledge that Mars believed completely lost. Explorator fleets that located such civilizations faced complex decisions about how to approach them, balancing the desire to recover their technology against the need to integrate them into the Imperium and assess whether their long isolation had allowed dangerous deviations from acceptable human norms. The protocols for handling contact with isolated human civilizations required careful assessment of their technological and cultural development. Explorator forces conducted extensive observation before initiating direct contact, using servo skulls and remote sensors to gather intelligence about the civilization's capabilities and social organization. Tech priests analyzed their technology to determine whether it derived from recognizable STC patterns or represented novel developments that might indicate either impressive innovation or dangerous deviation from proper human technological development. The decision about whether to establish peaceful contact or simply seize valuable technology by force depended on assessments of the civilization's likely receptiveness to imperial integration and whether their knowledge warranted the effort of negotiation. The future trajectory of explorator operations remained uncertain as the Imperium struggled to adapt to the galaxy's transformed strategic environment. The traditional model of explorator fleets conducting systematic surveys of unexplored regions while maintaining minimal contact with other imperial institutions seemed increasingly untenable given the demands of coordinated response to major threats. The integration of Explorator assets into broader Imperial military operations, as Guilliman's reforms demanded, promised more efficient resource utilization, but risked subordinating the quest for knowledge to short-term tactical considerations. The balance between these competing priorities would determine whether Explorator fleets continued operating as relatively independent research expeditions or transformed into specialized technical support units for Imperial military forces. The technological and doctrinal debates sparked by Call's innovations and the desperate circumstances of the current era would shape Mechanicus research philosophy for generations to come. The fundamental question of whether the quest for knowledge should emphasize archaeological recovery or active innovation remained unresolved, with different factions within the Mechanicus advocating incompatible positions. The outcome of these debates would influence not only how Explorator fleets conducted their operations, but also the broader direction of Mechanicus technological development and humanity's prospects for recovering the capabilities lost during the Age of Strife. The Explorator fleets that departed Forge Worlds in the early decades of the 42nd millennium carried with them the accumulated experience of 10,000 years of exploration operations, and the weight of expectations that their discoveries might provide salvation for an Imperium facing unprecedented challenges. Their commanders understood that the galaxy had grown more dangerous, the threats more severe, and the margin for error smaller than at any point since the Horus Heresy. Yet the fundamental imperative that drove the first Explorator expeditions during the Great Crusade remained unchanged: the sacred duty to recover lost knowledge, preserve the machine God's works, and expand humanity's understanding of the technologies that might ensure its survival among the stars. The quest for knowledge continued, as it had for millennia, and as it would for as long as the Mechanicus endured, driving tech priests to venture into the unknown in search of the secrets that might yet save humanity from the darkness that threatened to consume it.